The fluorescent lights of Oceanside Medical Center hummed with that particular frequency that lives somewhere between a headache and a prayer. At 52 years old, Dr. Sarah Chen had long stopped hearing it. 28 years of 12-hour shifts had turned the sound into white noise. The same way the smell of antiseptic had become her perfume and the taste of lukewarm coffee had replaced any memory of what good food tasted like. But tonight, the lights seemed louder than usual, or maybe it was just the silence that made them seem that way. Sarah stood in the staff locker room, her hands trembling, as she spun the combination lock for what she thought might be the last time. 3 turns right, 2 turns left, 1 turn right. The metal door swung open with a groan that sounded too much like grief. Inside, her life stared back at her. A faded photograph of Emma, her daughter, graduation day from undergraduate studies at Berkeley. Emma in her cap and gown, that brilliant smile that could light up the darkest operating room. Sarah touched the edge of the photo, her fingertip leaving a smudge on the protective plastic sleeve. Emma was 21 now, a third-year medical student at Johns Hopkins. Following in her mother's footsteps, though Sarah had tried for years to talk her out of it. "You deserve better than this," she had told Emma over the phone last month. "You deserve a life that doesn't smell like death and disinfectant." And Emma, brilliant, stubborn Emma, had laughed. "Mom, you literally save lives. That's not nothing. That's everything." Sarah picked up her stethoscope, the one her father had given her when she graduated from nursing school in 1996. The rubber tubing was cracked in places, held together with medical tape. The bell was scratched and dented from being dropped more times than she could count. But it still worked. It still let her hear the most important sound in the world. The human heartbeat, proof of life, evidence that someone was still fighting. She draped it around her neck one last time, feeling the familiar weight settle against her collarbone. Then she reached for her hospital badge. Dr. Sarah Chen, RN, MSN, head trauma nurse, level 1 trauma center certified. The badge felt heavier than it should. Maybe because she knew she was about to hand it over. Maybe because she knew that after tonight, those letters after her name wouldn't mean anything anymore. Her shift had started 18 hours ago at 5 in the morning on a quiet Sunday. Quiet was a dangerous word in emergency medicine. It was the word that came before the storm. And tonight, the storm had been a 3-car pileup on Interstate 5, just south of Carlsbad. 2 dead on arrival, 3 critical. Sarah had spent the last 6 hours elbow deep in trauma, her scrubs soaked through with blood that wasn't hers, her hands steady even when her heart wasn't. She had saved all 3 of the critical patients. She knew she had, because that was what she did. That was what she had always done, even when the odds were impossible, even when the protocols said to let go, especially then. But it was the 4th patient that had destroyed her, the one who wasn't supposed to be there, the one who arrived at 9:17 that morning, carried in by 2 paramedics who looked like they had seen a ghost. John Doe, they had called him. No wallet, no identification, found unconscious in an alley off Harbor Drive. Gunshot wounds to the abdomen and chest. Septic shock. Blood pressure 70/40. Oxygen saturation at 78%. He was dying, and nobody seemed to care. Sarah had been in the supply room restocking trauma cart number 3 when she heard the commotion. She ran to the emergency bay doors and saw them wheeling him in. His skin was gray, the color of week-old newspaper. His breathing was shallow, rattling. His eyes were half open, unfocused. But it was the tattoo that caught her attention. On his left shoulder, partially visible beneath the torn and bloodied shirt, an eagle clutching a trident and a flintlock pistol. She knew that symbol. Everyone who had ever worked near a military base knew that symbol. Navy SEAL. She had grabbed the gurney, helped guide it into Trauma Bay 4. The attending physician, a young resident named Dr. Patel, took one look at the patient and shook his head. "No ID, no insurance information," he said. "We need to stabilize and transfer to County General. They have the resources for indigent patients." Sarah stared at him. "This man is going into septic shock. He won't survive a transfer." Dr. Patel looked down at his tablet. "According to the EMTs, he's been down for at least 6 hours. Infection is systemic. Even if we pump him full of antibiotics, his chances are minimal. And without insurance authorization, we can't justify the cost of the high-level medications he would need." "What medications?" Sarah asked, already knowing the answer. "Linezolid. Maybe tigecycline if the cultures come back resistant. But those are restricted formulary. We need pre-approval from the pharmacy board and documented insurance coverage. You know the rules, Sarah. She did know the rules. She had been following them for 28 years. Rules that said you couldn't treat a patient without proper authorization. Rules that said you had to consider cost-benefit analysis before making clinical decisions. Rules that turned human beings into line items on a budget report. Rules that were about to kill a veteran. Sarah looked down at the man on the gurney. His eyes flickered, focused on her for just a second. His lips moved, barely a whisper. Lazarus. She leaned closer. What did you say? Find Hayes. His voice was so faint she almost missed it. Trust no one. Lazarus. Then his eyes rolled back and the monitor started screaming. Sarah made her decision in the space of a heartbeat. She grabbed the crash cart, started barking orders to the nurses around her. Get me 2 large bore IVs, normal saline wide open. I need a gram of vancomycin push now, and get me the code to the restricted pharmacy cabinet. Dr. Patel put his hand on her shoulder. Sarah, you can't. She turned to look at him, and whatever he saw in her eyes made him step back. I just did. The next 4 hours were a blur of controlled chaos. Sarah had bypassed every protocol, broken every rule that stood between this man and survival. She had accessed the restricted pharmacy cabinet, the one that held medications reserved for active duty military personnel or critical insured cases. She had administered $8,000 worth of linezolid without authorization. She had personally performed bedside ultrasounds, placed a central line, managed the ventilator settings when the respiratory therapist hesitated. And it had worked. By 2 in the afternoon, John Doe's vitals had stabilized. His blood pressure was 90/60. His oxygen saturation was 94%. His fever had broken. He was going to live. Sarah had stood at his bedside, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not the quiet satisfaction of a job well done, but the fierce burning pride of knowing she had looked death in the face and won. Then Dr. Victor Sterling had walked into the room. Sterling was the hospital's chief executive officer, a 35-year-old MBA graduate from Wharton who had never touched a patient in his life. He wore suits that cost more than Sarah's monthly mortgage payment and spoke in corporate buzzwords that made her teeth ache. Patient outcomes, revenue streams, market positioning, as if healing the sick was the same as selling used cars. Dr. Chen, Sterling said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. My office. Now. She had followed him down the corridor, past the nurse's station where her colleagues suddenly became very interested in their computer screens. She had followed him into his glass-walled office with its view of the Pacific Ocean and its leather chairs that probably cost more than her car. And she had listened while he destroyed her. You accessed restricted medications without authorization. You treated an indigent patient with resources allocated for insured cases. You violated hospital policy, state regulations, and potentially federal law. The pharmacy board has been notified. The Joint Commission has been notified. The California Board of Registered Nursing has been notified. Sarah sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. The patient is alive. Sterling looked at her like she had just spoken in a foreign language. The patient is a John Doe with no ability to pay. You just cost this hospital $8,000 in unrecoverable expenses. Do you understand what that means? It means a veteran gets to live another day. Sterling's jaw tightened. How do you know he's a veteran? Because he has a tattoo? Do you know how many people get military tattoos who never served? Do you know how many con artists use that sympathy card to get free treatment? She met his eyes. I know what I saw. What you saw, Sterling said, leaning forward, is a liability that could cost me my job and this hospital its accreditation. As of this moment, you are suspended pending a formal review by the Medical Ethics Board. The hearing is scheduled for Monday morning at 9. I suggest you bring a lawyer. Because if I have my way, you'll never work in healthcare again. The words hit her like a physical blow, but she didn't flinch. She stood up, smoothed down her scrubs, and walked toward the door. Dr. Chen, Sterling called after her, one more thing. There's a federal agent waiting in conference room B. She wants to speak with you about the unauthorized drug access. Her name is Agent Vance. Sarah turned slowly. A federal agent? Sterling smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Apparently, accessing military-restricted pharmaceuticals without proper clearance is a matter of national security. Who knew? Conference room B was at the end of the administrative corridor, a windowless box with a table, 4 chairs, and a flickering ceiling light that made everyone look slightly dead. Sarah pushed open the door and found a woman sitting at the far end of the table. Agent Lisa Vance looked to be in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes the color of winter ice. She wore a gray pantsuit and a badge clipped to her belt. When she stood to shake Sarah's hand, her grip was firm and cold. "Dr. Chen," Agent Vance said, "thank you for meeting with me. I know this has been a difficult day." Sarah sat down across from her. "Am I under arrest?" Vance smiled slightly. "Not at the moment. I'm here as part of a routine investigation into pharmaceutical security protocols. The hospital flagged your access to the restricted cabinet. I just need to ask you a few questions about your decision-making process." For the next 30 minutes, Sarah answered questions. Why did you access the medication? Did anyone instruct you to do so? Have you accessed restricted medications before? Do you have any personal relationship with the patient? Sarah answered honestly. She had accessed the medication because the patient would have died without it. No one had instructed her. She had never broken protocol before in 28 years. She had never seen the patient before today. Agent Vance took notes on a small tablet, her expression neutral. Then she asked the question that made Sarah's blood run cold. Did the patient say anything to you before he lost consciousness? Sarah hesitated for just a fraction of a second. He was delirious, incoherent. Vance leaned forward. "Dr. Chen, I need you to understand something. The man you treated today is not just a random indigent patient. He is a person of interest in an ongoing federal investigation. Anything he said to you could be relevant to national security. So I'm going to ask you again. Did he say anything?" Sarah met her eyes. He said Lazarus. Vance's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them. Did he say anything else? "Find Hayes. Trust no one." Vance was quiet for a long moment. Then she closed her tablet and stood up. "Thank you, Dr. Chen. That's all I need for now. Someone will be in touch regarding the pharmaceutical violations. In the meantime, I need you to understand that discussing this patient with anyone could compromise an active investigation. Do you understand?" Sarah nodded. "Good," Vance said. Then she walked to the door, paused, and turned back. "One more thing. For your own safety, I would recommend you go straight home tonight. Don't stop anywhere. Don't talk to anyone. And if you notice anything unusual, call this number immediately." She placed a business card on the table. Sarah picked it up. It was plain white with a phone number and nothing else. "What kind of unusual?" Sarah asked. "The kind that gets people killed," Vance said. Then she was gone. Sarah sat alone in the conference room for 10 minutes, staring at the blank white card. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from exhaustion and something else. Something that felt like the floor had just dropped out from beneath her and she was still falling. She stood up, walked back to the locker room, and began the ritual of ending her shift. She stripped off her bloody scrubs, threw them in the biohazard bin. She washed her hands 3 times, scrubbing hard enough to hurt. She put on her street clothes, jeans, and a faded blue sweater that used to belong to her husband David before he died, before he killed himself. 4 years ago, 4 years since she had come home from a double shift and found him in the garage with the car running and a note on the dashboard that said, "I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough." David Chen had been a Marine, 2 tours in Iraq, decorated, honorable discharge, and then 20 years of civilian life that had slowly eaten him alive. The nightmares, the flashbacks, the guilt over things he would never talk about. Sarah had tried to help him. She had used every resource available. VA counseling, medication, support groups, nothing had been enough. In the end, the war had killed him anyway. Just took longer than a bullet. Sarah closed her locker for the last time and walked toward the exit. The night shift staff avoided her eyes. News traveled fast in a hospital. By now, everyone knew. Sarah Chen, the head trauma nurse who had been with Oceanside Medical for 28 years, had been suspended, maybe fired, maybe arrested. The whispers followed her down the corridor. "Did you hear? She stole drugs, treated a homeless guy with military medications. $8,000, can you imagine?" Sarah kept walking. She passed the trauma bay where John Doe was still being monitored. Through the window, she could see him lying in the bed, connected to monitors and IVs alive, breathing. She reached the main lobby, the automatic doors ahead of her, the parking lot beyond. 11:43 at night. The rain had started, Los Angeles autumn rain that came down hard and cold. Sarah pulled her jacket tighter and stepped toward the doors. They didn't open. She stepped back, then forward again. Still nothing. The motion sensors must be malfunctioning. She reached for the manual override button. That's when the lights went out. Not all of them, just the lobby lights. The emergency exit sign still glowed red in the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a backup generator hummed to life. Sarah stood in the sudden darkness, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. Then she heard it, the sound of engines, multiple engines, coming closer. Through the glass doors, she saw lights, not the gentle glow of headlights. These were high-intensity beams, the kind used by law enforcement or military vehicles. Three black Chevrolet Suburbans, completely unmarked, pulled into the ambulance bay with aggressive precision. Sarah took a step back. Her hand went to her pocket, fumbling for her phone. She needed to call someone. But who? Agent Vance? The police? Emma? The doors of the Suburbans opened in perfect synchronization. 6 men stepped out into the rain. They didn't run. They moved with the controlled economy of people who had been trained to move through hostile territory. People who knew that wasted motion could get you killed. They were dressed in full tactical gear, black cargo pants, combat boots, heavy vests with multiple pouches. But it was the way they carried themselves that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat, the way they scanned the environment, the way they moved in formation. These weren't police officers. These weren't even SWAT. These were operators. The automatic doors suddenly hissed open, and the 6 men entered the lobby. Water dripped from their gear onto the polished floor. The lead man was massive, easily 6'4" and 250 pounds of solid muscle. He had a thick beard streaked with gray and a scar that ran through his left eyebrow and down his cheek. His eyes were the color of winter sky, cold and clear, and absolutely focused. The hospital lobby went silent. A patient in the waiting room dropped his magazine. The security guard, a kind older man named Arthur, stood up from his desk, his hand moving toward the radio on his belt. The lead man didn't acknowledge anyone. He scanned the room with the systematic precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. His gaze moved from the waiting area to the triage desk to the hallway leading to the emergency department. Then his eyes found Sarah. She was standing 20 feet away, frozen in place, her back against the wall. Her jacket was clutched tight against her chest. Her face was pale in the emergency lighting. And for just a moment, the massive soldier's expression shifted from cold professionalism to something else. Recognition. He started walking toward her. His boots made heavy sounds on the floor. Thud, thud, thud. Each step measured, each step bringing him closer. Behind him, the other 5 men fanned out, taking positions around the lobby. It was a defensive perimeter, the kind used to protect high-value assets, politicians, diplomats, or witnesses. "Excuse me," a voice called out. Dr. Victor Sterling had appeared from the administrative corridor, his tie askew, his expensive shoes clicking on the wet floor. "Excuse me, you cannot bring weapons into this hospital. This is a medical facility. I am the chief executive officer, and I demand to know who is in charge here." The lead man didn't even look at Sterling. He kept walking towards Sarah. The other 5 soldiers ignored Sterling completely. Sterling's face flushed red. He reached out and grabbed the arm of one of the soldiers, a shorter man with arms like tree trunks. "I'm talking to you. I am calling security. I am calling the police." The shorter soldier stopped. He turned his head slowly and looked down at Sterling's hand on his arm. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and absolutely cold. "Sir, you have 3 seconds to remove your hand before I remove it for you." Sterling jerked his hand back as if he had been burned. The soldier turned away and resumed his position. The lead man was 10 feet away from Sarah now. 5 feet, 3 feet, then he stopped. Up close, he was even more intimidating. His shoulders were impossibly broad. His hands looked like they could crush stone. There was a faint smell of gunpowder and rain, and something else, something familiar that Sarah couldn't quite place. She looked up at him, her heart hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. I don't understand." The massive soldier reached up with one gloved hand. For a moment, Sarah thought he was reaching for a weapon. Every muscle in her body tensed, preparing to run or fight or scream. But he didn't reach for a weapon. He reached for his face. His fingers found the edge of his tactical sunglasses and pulled them off. His eyes were blue, clear blue, the kind of blue that made you think of summer skies and open oceans. And as he looked at Sarah, the hardness in those eyes melted away, replaced by something that looked painfully like gratitude. "Ma'am," he said, his voice was deep and rough, like gravel rolling over concrete. But there was warmth in it. "Respect. SEAL Team 7 is present and accounted for." Behind him, the 5 other operators snapped to attention in perfect unison. Their heels came together with sharp clicks. Their right hands came up in crisp salutes. "Ma'am," the lead soldier repeated. The silence in the lobby was absolute. It was the kind of silence that came before earthquakes, before revelations, before the entire world shifted on its axis. Sarah stared at the man in front of her. She looked at his face, really looked at it. The blue eyes, the scar through the eyebrow that continued down his cheek. The way he held his jaw slightly to the left, like he was compensating for old pain. And suddenly she was somewhere else. Not in the lobby of Oceanside Medical Center. Not in the present at all. She was in a tent, a medical tent in Forward Operating Base Kandahar. The air smelled like dust and diesel fuel and blood. The sound of helicopter rotors was shaking the canvas walls. And on the stretcher in front of her was a young man, 20 years old, 24 at most, bleeding out, drowning in his own blood. His eyes had been blue, clear blue, like summer sky. Sarah's bag slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a soft thud. Her lips formed a word, a name, but no sound came out. The soldier stepped closer. When he spoke, his voice was softer, gentle, like he was talking to someone who might break if he spoke too loud. "Ma'am," he said, "my name is Commander Dylan Cross, United States Navy, SEAL Team 7. And 18 years ago, in a medical tent outside Kandahar, you saved my life." Sarah's knees went weak. She reached out blindly and her hand found the wall, holding her upright. Her vision blurred. For a moment, she thought she might faint. "Dylan," she whispered. The name came back to her from across nearly 2 decades, from a place she had tried very hard to forget. Dylan Cross, 24 years old, gunshot wound to the throat, severed jugular vein, no surgeon on base, no way to save him. Except she had saved him. "You were dead," Sarah said. Her voice was shaking. "Your vitals on the helicopter. You flatlined." Dylan smiled. It was a slow, tired smile that made him look younger. "I'm hard to kill, ma'am." He gestured to the men behind him. "We all are, thanks to you." He turned slightly, his voice rising back to command pitch. "Is this woman being processed for termination?" Dr. Sterling had been standing frozen near the triage desk. Now he stepped forward, trying to regain some authority. His voice came out higher than usual. "She is being suspended for gross misconduct. She stole hospital property and violated multiple federal regulations. I don't care who you are. This is a private medical facility, and you are trespassing." Dylan turned to look at Sterling. The smile was gone. The warmth was gone. What was left was the cold efficiency of a man who had learned to kill before most people learned to drive. "Terminated," Dylan repeated the word slowly like he was tasting something poisonous. "For saving lives." "For stealing $8,000 worth of restricted medication," Sterling said, his voice gaining confidence. "For treating an indigent patient with resources designated for insured cases. For violating hospital policy and potentially federal law." Dylan laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. It was the kind of laugh that came before violence. He looked back at his team. "Boys, did you hear that? The man in the expensive suit thinks the angel is a criminal." The other 5 SEALs made sounds that might have been laughter. But there was no humor in it. It was threatening, predatory. "The angel?" Sterling frowned. "Her name is Sarah Chen." "That's what you call her," Dylan said, stepping into Sterling's personal space until the administrator had to crane his neck up to meet his eyes. "In Kandahar, in places you can't even find on a map. We called her the Angel of Shadows, because she moved through that medical tent like a ghost, pulling men back from death when there was no hope left." He turned back to Sarah. His expression softened again. The transformation so complete it was almost shocking. He saw her trembling hands. He saw the cheap tote bag on the floor with her life packed inside it. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes and the resignation in the slope of her shoulders. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "we didn't come here just to say thank you. We came because we owe you a debt, a blood debt. And we just found out that someone is trying to hurt you for doing the same thing you did for us. Saving lives when nobody else would." Sarah shook her head. "Dylan, I was just a nurse. I was just doing my job." "No, ma'am," Dylan said firmly. "You were a volunteer with Doctors Without Borders. You weren't even supposed to be in that sector. But when the ambush happened, when my team was bleeding out and there was no surgeon on base, you didn't run. You came for us." He looked at his watch, then back at her. "We have transport waiting outside, but we're not leaving until this situation is resolved." He turned to Sterling. You said she accessed $8,000 in medication. How much? Sterling blinked, confused by the sudden change in topic. I, approximately $8,000 plus potential fines and legal fees. Dylan reached into his tactical vest. He pulled out a thick stack of bills, $100 bills held together with a rubber band. It was cash, mission contingency money, the kind of money that didn't exist on any official record. He didn't count it. He just tossed the entire stack at Sterling. The bills hit the administrator's chest and scattered across the floor. There was easily $20,000 there. Keep the change, Dylan said coldly. Buy yourself a conscience. He turned back to Sarah. Ma'am, I need you to grab your bag. We need to move. Now. But Sarah didn't move. She was staring at Dylan, her mind racing. Where are we going? Dylan, I just lost my job. I don't have anywhere to go. You don't need this job, Dylan said. And you're not going home. Not tonight. Why not? Because the patient you saved this morning, the John Doe, he's not a random homeless veteran. His name is Lieutenant James Hayes, Jr. And the people who shot him are the same people who sent that federal agent to question you. They want something you have, and they're willing to kill to get it. Sarah's hand went to her pocket, the pocket where she had found something after treating John Doe. Something he must have slipped in there when she was checking his vitals. A small object wrapped in gauze. A USB drive. How did you... Sarah started to ask. Dylan held up a hand. Not here. Not now. He looked past her toward the hospital corridors. We have maybe 5 minutes before whoever is tracking you realizes we're here. So I need you to trust me. The same way I trusted you when I was bleeding out on that stretcher 18 years ago. Sarah looked at the 6 men surrounding her. They weren't threatening. They were protective. A wall of muscle and weapons standing between her and something she didn't understand yet. She thought about this last 28 years, the shifts that blurred together, the patients saved and lost, the bureaucracy that had slowly strangled the joy out of healing, the empty apartment waiting for her, the daughter who was 3,000 miles away, living her own life. She thought about David, about the note he had left. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough. Maybe she was tired of being strong alone. Sarah bent down and picked up her bag. Okay, she said quietly. Let's go. Dylan's face broke into a smile, genuine this time. He gestured to his team. Diamond formation. The Angel is precious cargo. The 5 other SEALs immediately moved into position around Sarah. 2 in front, 2 on the sides, 1 behind. Sarah was in the center, completely surrounded. It was the formation used to protect heads of state, to protect people whose lives were worth more than the lives of their protectors. Moving, Dylan commanded. They walked toward the exit as one unit, boots hitting the floor in synchronized rhythm. Sterling stood in the middle of the lobby, surrounded by scattered $100 bills, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The security guard, Arthur, stood near his desk. As they passed, Dylan stopped. Arthur, is it? Arthur nodded, his eyes wide. You were the only person in this building who looked at her with respect when we walked in, Dylan said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy coin. It was a challenge coin, the kind given to recognize exceptional service. This one was embossed with a golden trident and the words SEAL Team 7. Dylan pressed it into Arthur's hand. If you ever need anything at all, you call the number on the back of that coin. Understood? Arthur looked at the coin, then at Sarah, then back at Dylan. Yes, sir. Dylan nodded. Go on then, ma'am, Arthur said to Sarah, his voice shaking slightly. I think you're in good hands. The automatic doors opened, and the cold rain hit Sarah's face like a baptism. The 3 Suburbans were still running, exhaust rising in the damp air. Dylan opened the rear door of the middle vehicle. After you, ma'am. Sarah climbed in. The interior smelled like leather and gun oil and coffee. Dylan climbed in beside her. The other SEALs filed into the other vehicles. Doors slammed shut in rapid succession. Engines revved. And then they were moving, pulling away from Oceanside Medical Center at high speed. Sarah turned to look out the back window. She could see the hospital receding into the distance, its lights growing smaller. 28 years of her life, disappearing into the rain. She turned back around and found Dylan watching her. Ma'am, he said, gently, I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to understand something. What happened tonight, it wasn't random. You weren't fired because you saved a patient. You were targeted by people who know what you did in Afghanistan, by people who want to make sure that secret never comes out. What secret? Sarah asked. I was a volunteer nurse who performed field surgery during an emergency. That's not a secret. That's triage. Dylan shook his head. It's more than that. And when we get to where we're going, you're going to learn exactly how much more. Where are we going? He looked out the window at the dark streets of San Diego racing past. To see an old friend. Someone who's been waiting 18 years to thank you in person. Someone who's also the reason we found you tonight. Who? Dylan met her eyes. Rear Admiral Marcus Hayes, commander of Naval Special Warfare, and the man whose life you saved before you saved mine. Sarah felt the world tilt. Marcus Hayes. She remembered that name too. A sergeant back then, older than the others, shrapnel in his chest, collapsed lung. She had operated on him first, before Dylan, before the others. He's alive? Dylan smiled. He's more than alive, ma'am. He's the reason we exist. The reason SEAL Team 7 became more than just another unit. And right now, he's in a hospital bed at Naval Medical Center, San Diego. Gunshot wounds to the chest. Critical condition. Dylan paused and something passed across his face. Something that looked like fear. And ma'am, he's asking for you. Because the surgeons at the Naval Hospital say he's not going to make it through the night without a miracle. He looked at her directly. They say he needs an angel. The Suburban drove through the rain, heading north toward the naval base. And in the back seat, Sarah Chen sat with her hands folded in her lap, feeling the weight of 18 years pressing down on her shoulders. Feeling the weight of a debt she had never known she was owed. And feeling, for the first time in 4 years, like maybe her life wasn't over after all. Maybe it was just beginning again. The rain hammered against the bulletproof windows of the Suburban as they drove north on Interstate 5. Sarah Chen sat in the back seat, her hands folded in her lap, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 30 minutes. 18 years. Commander Dylan Cross had said it took them 18 years to find her. 18 years since Afghanistan. Since the dust and the blood and the screaming. Since the day she had stopped being a nurse and become something else. Something she had spent nearly 2 decades trying to forget. Dylan sat beside her, his massive frame taking up most of the back seat. He wasn't looking at her. His eyes were focused on the side mirror, watching the traffic behind them with the kind of vigilance that never really goes away. Once you learn to watch for threats, you never stop watching. Ma'am, Dylan said quietly, breaking the silence. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Sarah turned to look at him. What? The patient you treated this morning. John Doe. Did he give you anything besides the words you told Agent Vance? Sarah's hand went instinctively to her pocket. The pocket where the USB drive was hidden, wrapped in gauze, small enough to miss unless you were looking for it. She had found it 2 hours ago when she was changing out of her scrubs, had almost thrown it away, thinking it was just a piece of medical waste that had gotten caught in her pocket during the chaos. But something had made her look closer. Something about the way it was wrapped, deliberate, careful, like someone had placed it there on purpose. Dylan was watching her face. He had the kind of eyes that could read a person, the kind that came from years of knowing that reading someone wrong could get you killed. Yes, Sarah said finally. She pulled a small package from her pocket and unwrapped it. The USB drive gleamed dull black in the passing streetlights. He must have slipped it into my pocket when I was checking his vitals. I didn't notice until after my shift ended. Dylan took the drive carefully, like it was a live grenade. He turned it over in his hands, examining it. Standard commercial drive, 16 gigabytes. No external markings. He pulled out his phone and connected the drive through an adapter. The screen lit up. 2 files, both encrypted. The file names made Sarah's blood run cold. Lazarus Manifest. Patient 0, Lieutenant James Hayes. Dylan stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he disconnected the drive and handed it back to Sarah. Keep it safe, ma'am. Don't let it out of your sight. What's on that drive is probably the reason someone is trying to kill you. The reason someone is trying to kill me? Sarah's voice rose slightly. Dylan, I'm a nurse. I work in a hospital. I don't have state secrets. I don't have classified information. I saved a patient's life this morning, and now I'm in the back of a military vehicle being told that people want me dead. I need you to explain what is happening. Dylan was quiet for the moment. Then he leaned forward and tapped on the partitions separating them from the driver. Tank, he said, take us to the safe house first. We need time before we go to the hospital. The driver, a massive man who somehow made Dylan look small by comparison, nodded. Roger that, Commander. ETA, 20 minutes. Dylan turned back to Sarah. Ma'am, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible, but I need you to listen, and I need you to remember, Because 18 years ago, you did something that the Pentagon has been trying to cover up ever since. Sarah felt her heart start to race. What did I do? Dylan took a breath. You saved 12 men who should have been dead. You performed surgeries that no nurse should have been able to perform. You used medications that weren't even supposed to exist. And you created something that the military has been hunting for ever since. A protocol, a method, a miracle. He paused. We call it the Lazarus Protocol because you brought us back from the dead. The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. Lazarus, the same word John Doe had whispered to her that morning. The same word that was in the file name on the USB drive. I don't understand, Sarah said. I performed field surgery during a mass casualty event. There was no surgeon on base. I did what I had to do to keep people alive until they could get to a real hospital. That's not a protocol. That's emergency medicine. Dylan shook his head. It was more than that, ma'am, and I think part of you knows it. I think part of you has always known it. He looked out the window at the dark streets passing by. Tell me what you remember about that day. August 15th, 2005. Forward Operating Base Kandahar. What do you remember? Sarah closed her eyes. She didn't want to remember. She had spent 18 years building walls around those memories, locking them away in the parts of her mind she didn't visit. But Dylan's voice was pulling her back, pulling her down into the past. And suddenly she wasn't in the Suburban anymore. She was in the tent. The heat was unbearable. Afghanistan in August was like standing inside an oven, and the portable air conditioning unit in the medical tent was struggling to keep up. Sarah had been at Forward Operating Base Kandahar for 3 weeks, working with Doctors Without Borders. She was 34 years old, recently divorced, looking for something to give her life meaning beyond the routine of hospital shifts and insurance paperwork. She had thought volunteering in a war zone would give her purpose. What it gave her was nightmares. The explosion happened at 11:17 in the morning. Sarah was in the supply tent taking inventory of medication when the ground shook so hard it knocked her off her feet. She heard the screaming before she even got up. Incoming, mass casualty, all medical personnel to triage. She ran, grabbed her bag, didn't think about body armor or helmets or the fact that she was running toward the sound of gunfire. She just ran. The convoy came through the gates, moving too fast, tires shredded, metal screaming. 3 Humvees shot to pieces. Men were being dragged out of the vehicles and there was blood everywhere. More blood than Sarah had ever seen in her life. "We need a surgeon," someone was screaming. "Get the surgeon now." But there was no surgeon. Dr. Ferris, the only physician on base with surgical experience, was on leave in Germany. There was nobody except Sarah. 12 men were laid out on stretchers in the triage area. All of them were special operations. Navy SEALs. Sarah could tell by their gear, by the way they held themselves even when they were bleeding out. These weren't regular infantry. These were America's most elite warriors, and they were dying. The senior medical officer, a captain named Morrison, was going down the line making assessments. This one needs immediate evac. This one is stable. This one is... He looked at the next stretcher and his face went pale. This one isn't going to make it. Sarah looked down at the man on the stretcher. He was older than the others, maybe 40. Sergeant stripes on his torn uniform, shrapnel in his chest, right side, collapsed lung. His lips were blue, his breathing was shallow and wet. His name tape read Hayes. Sarah knelt down beside him. She checked his pulse. Thready, weak. She looked at his chest wound. The shrapnel had punctured his lung and was possibly lodged near his heart. He needed a thoracic surgeon in a fully equipped operating room. What he had was a tent in the desert and a nurse with an associate's degree. Captain Morrison put his hand on Sarah's shoulder. "He's gone, Chen. We need to focus on the ones we can save." But Sarah wasn't listening. She was looking at Sergeant Hayes' face. His eyes were half open, unfocused. But they were aware. He knew he was dying, and he wasn't afraid. He was just resigned. That resignation made Sarah angry, made her furious in a way she couldn't explain. This man had fought for his country, had survived God knows how many missions, and now he was going to die in a tent because the system said he wasn't worth the resources it would take to save him. "No," Sarah said. Morrison blinked. "What?" "I said no." Sarah stood up. "Get me a crash cart, get me surgical supplies, and get me the satellite phone to patch me through to Landstuhl Medical Center in Germany." "Chen, you can't..." "Watch me," Sarah said. And the tone in her voice, the absolute certainty, made Morrison step back. Sarah worked on Sergeant Hayes for 2 hours. She cut into his chest with hands that shouldn't have been steady, but were. She found the shrapnel, a twisted piece of metal the size of her thumb, lodged half an inch from his pericardium. One wrong move and she would have killed him instantly. She didn't make a wrong move. She was on the satellite phone the entire time. A German thoracic surgeon named Dr. Muller talking her through every cut, every suture. Sarah's hands moved like they belonged to someone else, someone who knew what they were doing, someone who had done this 1,000 times before. She saved him, got his lung reinflated, got the bleeding stopped, got his vitals stable. And then the next patient was brought in. Dylan Cross, 24 years old, gunshot wound to the throat. The bullet had grazed his jugular vein but hadn't severed it completely. Blood was pulsing out with every heartbeat, and he had maybe 10 minutes before he bled out. Sarah didn't hesitate. She went to work. The morphine was running low. The surgical supplies were running out. Captain Morrison was begging her to stop, to let the ones who were too far gone die, so she could focus on the ones with better odds. Sarah ignored him. She saved Dylan, then she saved the next one, and the next one. 8 hours of continuous surgery, moving from patient to patient like she was running an assembly line. Except the product wasn't cars or computers. It was human lives. At some point, she ran out of the standard antibiotics. The infections were systemic. Sepsis was setting in on multiple patients. She needed something stronger, something that could fight the bacterial strains that regular antibiotics couldn't touch. That's when she found the locked cabinet. It was in the corner of the medical tent, behind the crash carts. A heavy steel cabinet with a biohazard symbol and a lock that required a 6-digit code. Sarah had seen it before, but had never asked what was inside. Medical facilities in combat zones often had experimental medications, drugs that weren't approved for civilian use, but were being tested under military protocols. She asked Morrison for the code. He refused, said the medications in that cabinet were classified, experimental, not approved for use except under direct orders from command. Sarah looked at the 12 dying men on the stretchers around her, and then she looked at Morrison. Give me the code, or I will crowbar this cabinet open and deal with the consequences later. Morrison gave her the code. Inside the cabinet were vials of clear liquid. The labels read RT7, experimental broad-spectrum antimicrobial. Restricted use, authorization required. There was no authorization form. No time to get one. Sarah grabbed the vials and started administering them. One to Sergeant Hayes, one to Dylan Cross, one to each of the 12 men whose lives were hanging by threads so thin they were almost invisible. Within hours, the infections started to recede. The fevers broke. The vital signs stabilized. All 12 men survived. The military called it a miracle. They interviewed Sarah for hours, wanting to know how she had done it, how a nurse with no surgical training had performed 12 complex operations and saved 12 men who should have been dead. Sarah told them the truth. She had followed instructions from Dr. Muller over the satellite phone. She had used the experimental medication because there was no other option. She had done what needed to be done. The military thanked her, gave her a commendation letter, and then quietly escorted her out of Afghanistan within 48 hours, told her that her volunteer status was being revoked due to unauthorized use of classified materials, told her she was being sent home for her own safety. What they didn't tell her was that they were erasing her name from every official record, classifying everything that had happened in that tent, making it as if Sarah Chen had never been there at all. Because the military didn't want people asking questions about RT7, about where it came from, about what it really was. And they especially didn't want people knowing what it did to the men who received it. Sarah opened her eyes. She was back in the Suburban, her face wet with tears. She hadn't realized she was crying. Dylan was watching her with an expression that was both sad and understanding. "You remember," he said quietly. "I remember saving your lives," Sarah whispered. "I remember using medication I shouldn't have used. I remember them sending me home and telling me never to talk about it." Dylan nodded. "What you don't remember, because they never told you, is what happened after. What RT7 really was. What it did to us." He pulled up his sleeve, exposing his forearm. In the dim light of the car, Sarah could see his veins. They looked normal at first, but then Dylan turned on the overhead light and Sarah saw it. His blood, visible through the skin, had a faint luminescence, a barely perceptible glow like bioluminescent algae in dark water. "What?" Sarah breathed. "RT7 wasn't just an antibiotic," Dylan said. It was something else, something the Pentagon had been developing since the 1960s. A compound derived from, he paused, choosing his words carefully, from biological samples that weren't human. Sarah stared at him. You're saying it was alien. Dylan met her eyes. I'm saying it wasn't from any laboratory I've ever heard of. And I'm saying that when you injected us with it, when you saved our lives, you changed us on a genetic level. The Suburban pulled off the highway, turning onto a dark side road. They were heading into the hills east of San Diego, away from the city lights. Changed you how? Sarah asked. Dylan was quiet for a moment. We heal faster. We're stronger. We can go longer without sleep, without food. Our reflexes are faster than they should be. We age slower. He looked down at his hands. I'm 41 years old, ma'am, but my biological markers say I'm 32. The other 11 men who received RT7, they're all the same. We're aging at about 2/3 normal rate. Sarah felt the world tilting. That's not possible. It shouldn't be, Dylan agreed. But it is. For 18 years, the 12 of us have been living proof that R-7 works, that it creates enhanced soldiers, super soldiers. He paused. And for 18 years, the Pentagon has been trying to recreate it. They have the original formula. They have samples of our blood. But they can't make it work. Every time they try to synthesize RT7, every time they test it on new subjects, it fails. The subjects either die or the drug has no effect. Sarah's mind was racing. Why, what's different? Dylan looked at her. You are, ma'am. You're the difference. You didn't just inject us with RT7. You performed surgery. You did transfusions. You mixed our blood types, used plasma from one patient to stabilize another. You were working in field conditions, with limited supplies, making decisions on the fly. He leaned forward. The Pentagon thinks you created a unique combination, a specific sequence of events and procedures that can't be replicated. And they think you remember it. That somewhere in your memory, you have the exact protocol that turned 12 dying SEALs into something more than human. The Suburban stopped. They had pulled up to a small house, isolated on a hillside, surrounded by desert scrub. Security lights flickered on, illuminating a gravel driveway and a modest single-story structure that looked like any other Southern California ranch house, except for the tactical team that emerged from the shadows as soon as the vehicle stopped. Safe house, Dylan said. We'll be here for an hour. I need you to look at that USB drive. I need you to see what's on it, because James Hayes Jr. didn't risk his life to give you random data. He gave you proof. Proof of what we are. Proof of what they've been doing to cover it up. Sarah followed Dylan into the house. The interior was sparse. Tactical gear on the walls. Communications equipment in one corner. A large table in the center of the room with multiple laptops and monitors. The other SEALs from the hospital were already there. The massive driver, who Dylan had called Tank, was at one of the computers. Another SEAL, younger with sharp eyes and quick hands, was monitoring communications feeds. Dylan handed the USB drive to the young SEAL. Cypher, he said. Decrypt it. I need to know what's on there. Cypher took the drive and plugged it into an isolated laptop. His fingers flew across the keyboard. The encryption is military grade, he said after a moment. But it's an older protocol. Give me 15 minutes. Dylan turned to Sarah. Ma'am, there's someone here who needs to see you, someone who's been waiting a long time. He led her to a small bedroom at the back of the house, and there, lying on a hospital bed with an IV in his arm and monitors tracking his vitals, was the patient from Oceanside Medical Center. John Doe, except he wasn't John Doe anymore. His eyes were open, clear, focused. And when he saw Sarah, he tried to sit up. Ma'am, he said. His voice was stronger now, no longer the delirious whisper from the morning. I'm sorry. Sorry I got you involved in this. Sarah walked to his bedside. The monitors showed stable vitals. Blood pressure normal. Oxygen saturation 96%. The antibiotics were working. He was going to live. Who are you? Sarah asked. The man took a breath. Lieutenant James Hayes Jr., United States Navy, intelligence officer, and son of Rear Admiral Marcus Hayes, the man you saved in Kandahar 18 years ago. Sarah felt her knees go weak. She sat down hard in the chair beside the bed. Marcus Hayes had a son? James nodded. I was 7 years old when you saved my father's life. I grew up hearing the story about the nurse who performed miracles, the angel of shadows. My father talked about you every year on the anniversary of that day, said you gave him a second chance at life. He paused, his expression darkening. What he didn't tell anyone was that the second chance came with a price. What price? Sarah asked. James reached for a folder on the bedside table. His hands were shaking, but he managed to open it. Inside were medical reports, blood work, genetic analysis. RT7 didn't just heal us, James said. It changed us, made us stronger, faster, better. But it also did something else, something the Pentagon didn't discover until 5 years ago. He handed Sarah one of the reports. She scanned it, her medical training helping her parse the technical jargon. What she saw made her blood run cold. Genetic degradation, telomere shortening, cellular breakdown. The men who received RT7 in 2005 are dying, James said quietly. Not all at once, but one by one. Of the original 12, 4 are already dead. Cancer, organ failure, conditions that look natural but happen too fast, too young. He met Sarah's eyes. My father has maybe a year left, maybe less. The RT7 that saved his life is killing him. Slowly, and the Pentagon knows. They've known for 3 years. But instead of trying to cure it, instead of trying to help the men who serve their country, they're trying to weaponize it. Sarah's hands were shaking as she held the report. Weaponize it how? James took a breath. There's a defense contractor, Aegis Biomedical. They have a contract with the Pentagon to study RT7, to figure out how to create enhanced soldiers, super soldiers, but they can't crack the formula, can't figure out why it worked on the 12 of you and nobody else. So they started hunting, looking for anyone who was involved in the original treatment. Doctors, nurses, medics, most of the records were classified or destroyed. But my father kept files, personal files, notes about what happened that day in Kandahar. James's face twisted with pain. And someone inside Aegis found out. They came after him, tried to make him give up the files, give up the names of everyone involved. When he refused, they shot him. Sarah's mind was reeling. They shot a Navy admiral? They shot a man they thought was in their way, James said. And when I tried to investigate, when I started digging into Aegis and their Pentagon contracts, they came after me too. Shot me in an alley in San Diego and left me for dead. He looked at Sarah with eyes that held both gratitude and guilt. I knew they were watching the hospitals, knew they would track where the ambulance took me. So I made sure I ended up at Oceanside Medical Center, made sure I ended up in your trauma bay, because I knew you, knew your name from my father's files, knew that if anyone could save me, it was the Angel of Shadows. And I knew that if I could get the evidence to you, you were the one person they couldn't just make disappear. Because you're the key, Dr. Chen. You're the only person who knows how to recreate the Lazarus Protocol, and they need you alive. Sarah stood up, pacing. This is insane. I'm a nurse. I don't remember the exact dosages, the exact procedures. It was 18 years ago, and I was working in a war zone with limited supplies and no backup. I can't recreate that. James shook his head. The USB drive has everything. My father's notes, your medical records from that day, the ones the Pentagon thought they destroyed, blood samples from all 12 SEALs. Everything you need to understand what you did. He paused. And everything Aegis needs to create an army of enhanced soldiers, which is why they're coming for you. Why they sent Agent Vance to the hospital. Why they had Dr. Sterling flag you for suspension. Sarah stopped pacing. Sterling? Victor Sterling? James nodded. Your boss, the hospital CEO, he's not the villain you think he is. He's a victim. Before Sarah could process that, Dylan appeared in the doorway. Ma'am, you need to see this. Cypher cracked the encryption. Sarah followed Dylan back to the main room. The young SEAL, Cypher, had the USB drive's contents displayed on a large monitor. Files, hundreds of them, medical reports, photographs, audio recordings. And in the center of the screen, a video file. The timestamp read 2 days ago. Cypher clicked play. The video showed a man in his 50s, silver-haired, wearing a Navy admiral's uniform. He was sitting in what looked like a home office, speaking directly to the camera. His face was pale, drawn. He looked sick. Sarah, the admiral said, if you're watching this, it means I'm dead, or close enough that it doesn't matter anymore. My name is Marcus Hayes. 18 years ago, in a medical tent in Afghanistan, you saved my life. Gave me 18 more years with my son. 18 years I never should have had. He paused, struggling for breath. But those years came with a price. The medication you used, RT7, it changed me. Changed all of us. Made us stronger for a while. but now it's killing us. And there are people who want to use that, want to turn what you did into a weapon. Admiral Hayes leaned closer to the camera. I kept records. Everything that happened that day, every procedure you performed, every medication you used, every decision you made, I kept it all because I knew someday it would matter. Someday someone would need to know the truth. That truth is on this drive, all of it, and I'm trusting my son to get it to you because you're the only one who can understand it, the only one who can use it to help the others, the other SEALs who are dying because of what RT-7 is doing to them. The Admiral's eyes filled with tears. Sarah, I need you to do something for me, for all of us. I need you to finish what you started. Find a way to save us. Not just keep us alive for a few more years, actually save us, cure us. And if you can't, he took a shaky breath. If you can't, then I need you to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Make sure Aegis doesn't get their hands on the Lazarus protocol. Make sure the Pentagon doesn't create an army of enhanced soldiers who are just going to die young. The video ended. The screen went black. The room was silent. Then Dylan spoke. The Admiral recorded that video 48 hours ago, and 6 hours after he sent it to his son, he was shot twice in the chest by unknown assailants. He's at Naval Medical Center San Diego right now. Critical condition. The doctors say he won't make it through the night. Dylan turned to Sarah. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is what Cypher found in the other files. The young SEAL pulled up another document. It was an email chain. The sender was listed as v.sterling@oceansidemedical.com. Sterling had been sending reports, patient admissions, staff schedules, security protocols, all of it going to an encrypted address that Cypher had traced back to Aegis Biomedical. He's been spying for them, Sarah said, feeling betrayed. Victor Sterling has been working for Aegis. Dylan shook his head. Not working for them, ma'am, being forced to work for them. He pulled up another file, a photograph. It showed a young woman, early 20s, tied to a chair in what looked like a basement. Her face was bruised, terrified. That's Melissa Sterling, Dylan said. Victor Sterling's younger sister, 23 years old, graduate student at UCLA. Aegis kidnapped her 6 months ago. They told Sterling that if he didn't cooperate, if he didn't feed them information about patients and staff at Oceanside Medical, they would kill her. Sarah stared at the photograph. Oh, God. When you saved James Hayes Jr. this morning, Dylan continued, Sterling had to report it, had to flag you for suspension, because if he didn't, Aegis would know he was holding back, and they would kill his sister. Tank, the massive SEAL who had been driving, spoke up from his position near the window. Commander, we have movement. 3 vehicles approaching from the south. No headlights. Dylan's expression hardened. They found us. He looked at Sarah. Ma'am, I need you to stay in the back room with Lieutenant Hayes. Tank, Cypher, defensive positions. Nobody gets through that door. Sarah grabbed Dylan's arm. What about Admiral Hayes? If he's dying, if he needs you alive, Dylan said firmly, which means we protect you first. Then we get to the hospital. The sound of engines grew louder. Through the windows, Sarah could see vehicles pulling up outside. Black SUVs, men getting out, moving with tactical precision. But these weren't SEALs. These were contractors, mercenaries. Sarah ran back to the bedroom where James Hayes Jr. was lying. She locked the door behind her and moved to his bedside. The young lieutenant was pale, his eyes closed, conserving strength. They found us, Sarah said. James opened his eyes. Did you see the files? Did you see what's on the drive? Sarah nodded. Your father's notes, the medical records, everything. Then you know what you have to do, James said. You have to get to my father. You have to save him. And then you have to destroy that protocol. Make sure it never gets used again. Outside the bedroom, Sarah heard the sound of breaking glass. Gunfire, short controlled bursts. The SEALs were engaging the enemy. Sarah looked at the USB drive in her hand. Everything Marcus Hayes had collected. Everything that could save the dying SEALs. Everything that could create an army of super soldiers. And she thought about what Dylan had told her, about the men dying slowly because of what she had done 18 years ago, about the price of playing God in a desert tent, trying to save lives when maybe some lives weren't meant to be saved. The bedroom window exploded inward. A flash grenade rolled across the floor. Sarah had 1 second to react. She grabbed James Hayes Jr. by the shoulders and pulled him off the bed, using the metal frame as cover. The grenade detonated, light and sound so intense it felt like the world was ending. And then hands were grabbing her, pulling her up. She fought back, trying to break free. But whoever had her was strong, professional. Sarah Chen, a voice said. Her vision was clearing, and she saw the face of the person holding her. Agent Lisa Vance. We finally meet properly, Vance said. And then something hard hit Sarah in the back of the head, and the world went dark. When Sarah opened her eyes, she was moving. In a vehicle. Her hands were zip-tied in front of her. Her head throbbed where she had been struck. She could taste blood in her mouth. She tried to sit up, and a hand pushed her back down. Easy, Dr. Chen, a voice said. We're not going to hurt you. We just need your cooperation. Sarah turned her head. Agent Vance was sitting beside her in the back of what looked like an unmarked van. Two other men, both arms, sat across from them. Where are you taking me? Sarah asked. Somewhere we can talk, Vance said. Somewhere you can understand what's really at stake here. What happened to Dylan, to the others? Vance smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Your SEAL friends are alive. For now, we're not interested in them. We're interested in you, in what you know. I don't know anything, Sarah said. You know everything, Vance corrected. You know how to create the Lazarus Protocol, how to turn ordinary soldiers into enhanced warriors. That knowledge is worth billions, Dr. Chen. Billions to the company that can weaponize it. Billions to the foreign governments who would pay any price for an army of super soldiers. Sarah stared at her. You're not really a federal agent, are you? Vance laughed. Oh, I am. I'm just a federal agent who understands that patriotism doesn't pay the bills. Aegis Biomedical pays very well, and they're willing to share the profits with people who help them achieve their goals. She leaned closer to Sarah. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to help us recreate RT-7. You're going to tell us everything you did in that tent in Kandahar. Every dosage, every procedure. And in exchange, we'll make sure you're compensated, richly compensated. And if I refuse, Sarah asked, then we'll find other ways to motivate you, Vance said. She pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a photograph. It was Emma, Sarah's daughter, walking across the Johns Hopkins campus, backpack over her shoulder, completely unaware that someone was photographing her. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Your daughter is 21 years old, Vance said. Third-year medical student. Brilliant future ahead of her. It would be a shame if something happened to that future. Don't you dare, Sarah whispered. Then cooperate, Vance said simply. You have 48 hours. We'll provide you with everything you need. Lab equipment, blood samples from the original 12 SEALs, the RT-7 formula. You'll recreate the Lazarus Protocol. And if you succeed, you and your daughter walk away rich and alive. And if I fail? Vance's smile was cold. Then you'll watch your daughter die. Slowly, painfully, and then you'll die too. The van stopped. The doors opened. They were in an underground parking garage, concrete and fluorescent lights. Vance grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her out of the vehicle. Welcome to Aegis Biomedical West Coast Research Facility, Vance said. Your new home for the next 2 days. Sarah was led through security doors, down sterile corridors. She passed laboratories with equipment worth millions, containment rooms with biohazard symbols. And in one room behind thick glass, she saw them. Test subjects. Men and women strapped to medical beds, unconscious, with IVs running into their arms. Above each bed, a monitor showing vital signs, and beneath each monitor, a label. RT-7 trial. Subject status terminal. They're all dying, Sarah whispered. We've tried to recreate your work 237 times, Vance said. Every single trial has failed. The subjects either reject the treatment and die within hours, or they accept it and die within weeks. Organ failure. Genetic breakdown. We can't figure out what we're doing wrong. She looked at Sarah, but you can, because you're the only one who's ever made it work. They reached a large laboratory. Inside was everything a researcher could need. Electron microscopes, gene sequencers, centrifuges, and in a refrigerated cabinet, vials of clear liquid. RT-7, the original samples from 2005. Get comfortable, Dr. Chen, Vance said. You have until Wednesday at midnight. If you haven't given us a working protocol by then, your daughter Emma dies. And then you follow. Vance turned and walked out. The door locked behind her with a heavy click. Sarah stood alone in the laboratory, surrounded by millions of dollars of equipment and the weight of an impossible choice. Save the world from a super soldier program, or save her daughter. There was no good answer. And 48 hours wasn't nearly enough time to find one. The laboratory was silent except for the hum of machines. Sarah Chen sat at the workstation, staring at the vials of RT7 in front of her and tried to remember how to breathe. 48 hours. That was what Agent Vance had given her. 48 hours to recreate a miracle she had performed 18 years ago in a desert tent with dying men and no hope. 48 hours before her daughter died. Sarah's hands were shaking as she picked up one of the vials. The liquid inside was clear, almost colorless. It looked harmless, like saline or distilled water. But she knew what it really was. She had seen what it could do, seen it save 12 men who should have been dead, seen it change them into something more than human. And now she knew the price, the slow death that came years later, the genetic degradation, the cancer and organ failure that was killing the very men she had saved. She thought about Admiral Marcus Hayes lying in a hospital bed at Naval Medical Center, shot twice in the chest, his enhanced body trying to heal itself even as the RT-7 in his blood was destroying him from the inside. She thought about Dylan Cross and his team, aging slower than normal, but knowing that every day brought them closer to the same fate. She thought about her daughter Emma, walking across the Johns Hopkins campus, unaware that someone was watching her, hunting her. Sarah set down the vial and opened the files on the computer in front of her. Admiral Hayes had been thorough. The USB drive contained everything: medical records from that day in Kandahar, blood work from all 12 SEALs taken over the past 18 years, genetic analysis showing the mutations caused by RT7, and notes, hundreds of pages of notes in the Admiral's own handwriting, documenting every symptom, every change, every sign that the miracle drug was becoming a death sentence. But there was something else in the files, something Sarah hadn't expected, a folder labeled Patient Zero. She clicked it open. Inside was a file that made her blood run cold. It was dated 1968, 37 years before she had ever touched RT7. The document was heavily redacted, whole paragraphs blacked out, but what remained was enough to understand. RT7 hadn't been developed by the Pentagon. It had been discovered, found in biological samples recovered from a crash site in New Mexico in 1947. Samples that weren't human, samples that contained proteins and enzymes that didn't exist in any known terrestrial organism. For 20 years, military scientists had studied the samples, trying to understand them, trying to weaponize them, and in 1968, they had succeeded in creating a synthetic version. They called it RT7. Resurrection Therapy, Iteration 7. The first 6 iterations had killed every test subject within hours. RT7 had worked, sort of. It enhanced healing, increased strength and reflexes, slowed aging. But it also did something else, something the scientists couldn't control. It rewrote DNA, changed the fundamental genetic code of anyone who received it, and those changes were unstable, terminal. The military had conducted trials, small scale, classified. Every single test subject had died within 5 years. The program was shut down in 1973, and all remaining samples of RT7 were ordered destroyed. Except they weren't destroyed. Someone had kept samples, hidden them, moved them to forward operating bases in combat zones where oversight was minimal and documentation was spotty. And in 2005, those samples had ended up in a locked cabinet in a medical tent in Afghanistan, where Sarah Chen had found them, used them, saved 12 men, created the only successful Lazarus protocol in history. Sarah sat back in her chair, her mind reeling. She hadn't just performed emergency field medicine. She had stumbled onto something the military had been trying to achieve for decades, a way to make RT7 work without killing the recipients immediately. The question was how? What had she done differently? What combination of procedures and circumstances had made the impossible possible? She pulled up her own medical records from that day. Captain Morrison had documented everything, even though he had thought she was insane for trying. Every incision, every suture, every medication, every transfusion. The transfusions, Sarah's breath caught. She had used blood from one SEAL to stabilize another. Had mixed blood types because she was running out of compatible donors. Had performed emergency transfusions that violated every protocol in the book. And she had given all 12 men RT7. Not sequentially, not one at a time. She had administered it to all of them within the same 2-hour window. Their blood, enhanced by RT7, had been mixed, shared, combined. What if that was the key? What if RT7 didn't work in isolation? What if it needed to be part of a collective? A network of enhanced individuals whose blood and genetic material reinforced each other? Sarah started pulling up the genetic analysis reports. She compared the DNA of the 12 seals, and there it was, a common marker, a genetic sequence that appeared in all of them, but nowhere else in the human genome. They were linked, connected on a cellular level. They weren't 12 enhanced individuals. They were one organism distributed across 12 bodies. And that was why the Aegis trials kept failing. They were trying to enhance soldiers one at a time, trying to create isolated super soldiers. But RT7 didn't work that way. It required a group, a team. Blood shared between multiple recipients to stabilize the genetic changes. Sarah understood now, understood what she had created, and understood why it could never be recreated. Because what had happened in that tent wasn't science, it was chaos, desperation, a series of decisions made in the moment with no plan and no protocol. It was luck, pure dumb luck that had saved 12 men instead of killing them. And there was no way to replicate luck. Sarah looked at the vials of RT7 on the counter. Then she looked at the test subjects visible through the glass window of the adjacent room, dying because Aegis kept trying to force RT7 to work the way they wanted it to work instead of accepting what it actually was. A poison that sometimes, under exactly the right circumstances, became medicine. The door to the laboratory opened. Agent Vance walked in, flanked by 2 armed guards. She looked at Sarah, then at the computer screen, then at the vials on the counter. "Making progress, Dr. Chen?" Vance asked. Sarah met her eyes. "I know why your trials keep failing." Vance's expression sharpened. "Tell me." "It's not a formula," Sarah said. "It's not something you can replicate in a lab with controlled conditions. What happened in Kandahar was a perfect storm of circumstances that can't be recreated. The stress, the combat injuries, the blood transfusions between multiple recipients, the timing. All of it had to happen exactly the way it happened, or RT7 would have killed them all." "So you're saying it's impossible," Vance said. Her voice was dangerous. "I'm saying it's impossible to weaponize," Sarah corrected. "You can't create an army of enhanced soldiers. You can't control the variables. The best you can do is what I did. Save a few people under exactly the right conditions and hope they survive long enough to matter." Vance was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a new photograph. It was Emma. But this time she wasn't alone. There were men around her. Big men, professional looking. And they were close. Too close. "Your daughter just left her anatomy class," Vance said. "She's walking to the library. Alone. Those men are my colleagues. If I give the order, they'll take her. And you'll never see her again." She leaned close to Sarah. "So let me be very clear, Dr. Chen. I don't care if it's a perfect storm. I don't care if it's chaos. You're going to figure out how to make it work. You're going to give me a protocol I can use. And you're going to do it in the next 40 hours, or your daughter becomes a test subject." Sarah felt rage boiling up inside her. A cold, focused rage that she hadn't felt since the day she had stood over 12 dying SEALs and decided that protocol didn't matter, that rules didn't matter, that the only thing that mattered was saving lives. "You want a protocol?" Sarah said quietly. "Fine, I'll give you a protocol." She stood up and walked to the cabinet containing the RT7 samples. She pulled out 12 vials, arranged them on the counter in a precise pattern. "You need 12 subjects," Sarah said. "Not one, Nick. Not two, 12. They need to be injured, critically injured, blood loss, trauma. Their bodies need to be in a state of extreme stress, fight or flight response at maximum." She pulled up a diagram on the computer, a complex chart showing blood types and transfusion compatibility. "You need to cross-transfuse their blood while administering RT7. Each subject receives blood from at least 3 other subjects. The transfusions need to happen simultaneously, within a 2-hour window, and the subjects need to be close to each other, physically close, within the same room if possible." Vance was taking notes. "This is good. This is what we need. Keep going." Sarah continued, her voice clinical. "The success rate will be approximately 8%, maybe less. Most of your subjects will die. The ones who survive will be enhanced for approximately 15 to 18 years. Then the genetic degradation will begin. Cancer, organ failure. They'll die slowly and painfully." She turned to look at Vance. "That's your protocol. That's the Lazarus protocol. A low success rate, a short enhancement period, and a guaranteed death sentence. Still want to weaponize it? Vance smiled. That's acceptable. An 8% success rate means I can create enhanced soldiers. And 15 years is longer than most combat operatives serve anyway. The Pentagon will pay billions for this. She gestured to the guards. Get 12 volunteers from the contractor pool, men who are willing to take the risk for the right price. We'll start trials immediately. Sarah felt sick. She had just given Aegis exactly what they wanted. A protocol they could use. A way to create enhanced soldiers even if most of the subjects died in the process. But she had also bought time. Time for Dylan and his team to find her. Time to figure out a way to save Emma. She hoped it would be enough. While Sarah was imprisoned in the Aegis facility, 3,000 miles away in Baltimore, Commander Dylan Cross was hunting. He moved through the Johns Hopkins University campus like a shadow, invisible among the students and faculty. He was dressed in civilian clothes, jeans, and a jacket, but anyone who looked closely would see the way he moved. The constant scanning, the awareness of exits and threats, the coiled readiness of someone who expected violence at any moment. Beside him was Tank, the massive SEAL whose real name was Ramon Rodriguez. Tank was even less successful at blending in. At 6'4" and 280 pounds, he looked like a linebacker trying to hide in a library. They had arrived in Baltimore 6 hours ago, as soon as Cypher had tracked Emma Chen's location through her cell phone. Dylan had split the team. 3 SEALs stayed in San Diego to secure Lieutenant James Hayes Jr. and coordinate with naval intelligence. 3 came to Baltimore to protect Emma. Because if Aegis had Sarah, they would use Emma as leverage. It was textbook hostage negotiation. Take the thing the target loves most and use it to force compliance. Dylan wasn't going to let that happen. He spotted Emma Chen outside the medical library. She looked so much like her mother that it was unsettling. Same dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Same serious expression. Same intensity in her eyes. She was walking alone, backpack over one shoulder, textbooks under her arm, completely unaware that she was being hunted. But she wasn't alone. Dylan saw them immediately. 2 men, late 30s, athletic build, moving parallel to Emma's path but maintaining distance. They were professionals, contractors, the same type who had attacked the safe house. Tank, Dylan said quietly into his comm unit. 2 tangos, 11 o'clock and 2 o'clock. Standard surveillance pattern. Copy, Tank's voice came back. I've got visual. Want me to intercept? Negative. Let them show their hand. We need to know what the plan is. Dylan followed Emma as she entered the library. The 2 contractors followed. Inside, the library was crowded with students studying for midterms. Good cover. Hard to start trouble in a public space. Unless you didn't care about witnesses. Emma found a study desk on the 3rd floor near the windows. She settled in, opened her laptop, and started working. The 2 contractors took positions nearby, one at a table 20 feet away, one near the elevator. They were boxing her in, controlling her exits. Dylan moved to a position behind a bookshelf where he could see Emma, but remain hidden. Tank positioned himself near the stairs. If something happened, they would have overlapping fields of fire and multiple escape routes. They waited. 30 minutes passed. Emma studied, completely focused on her work. The contractors maintained their positions. And Dylan started to wonder if maybe they were just surveillance. Maybe Aegis wasn't planning to grab her here. Maybe they were just tracking her movements, waiting for a better opportunity. Then Emma's phone rang. Dylan watched as she answered it, watched her expression change from neutral to confused to terrified in the space of 3 seconds. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She was saying something into the phone, her voice rising. Mom? What? No, I'm not going anywhere with them. The contractor near the elevator stood up, started walking toward Emma. The second contractor did the same. Dylan moved. He stepped out from behind the bookshelf and walked directly to Emma's table. She looked up at him, phone still pressed to her ear, eyes wide with fear. Miss Chen, Dylan said quietly, my name is Commander Dylan Cross, United States Navy. Your mother sent me to protect you. I need you to stay calm and do exactly what I say. Emma stared at him. Who are you? The contractor was 10 feet away now. 5 feet. His hand was moving inside his jacket, reaching for something. Dylan's hand shot out and grabbed the man's wrist before the weapon cleared leather. With his other hand, Dylan struck hard and fast. 3 blows in rapid succession. Solar plexus, throat, temple. The contractor went down like a puppet with cut strings. The second contractor was pulling his weapon now, a compact pistol with a suppressor. But Tank was already there. 300 pounds of muscle and momentum hit the contractor like a freight train. The gun went flying, clattering across the floor. Students screamed, people dove for cover, someone was yelling about calling security. Dylan grabbed Emma's arm. "We need to move, now." But Emma was frozen, staring at the unconscious contractor on the floor. "Is he dead?" "No," Dylan said, "but he will be if we don't get you out of here. Let's go." He pulled her toward the stairs. Tank was right behind them, maintaining rear security. They hit the stairwell at a run. Mom Moham, Bon number run. Taking the steps 3 at a time. Behind them, Dylan could hear more footsteps, more contractors. Aegis had sent backup. "How many?" Tank asked. "At least 4 more," Dylan said. "Maybe 6. We're going out the east exit. Vehicles should be waiting." They burst out of the library into the autumn air. A black sedan was already pulling up, driven by Cypher. Dylan shoved Emma into the back seat and climbed in after her. Tank got in the front passenger seat, his pistol drawn and ready. "Go," Dylan ordered. The sedan accelerated hard, tires squealing. Dylan looked out the rear window and saw contractors pouring out of the library. One of them was talking urgently into a phone. They would have follow vehicles, probably already on the way. Emma was hyperventilating in the back seat. "What is happening? Who were those men? Where's my mother?" Dylan turned to look at her. "Miss Chen, I know this is terrifying, but I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your mother is alive. She's being held by a defense contractor called Aegis Biomedical. They're using her to recreate a medical protocol from 18 years ago, and they were going to kidnap you to use as leverage against her." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Why, what did my mom do?" "She saved my life," Dylan said simply, "and the lives of 11 other men, and now people want to turn that into a weapon." He looked forward. "Cypher status?" "We've got company," Cypher said. 2 vehicles. Black SUVs closing fast. Dylan pulled out his phone and made a call. The voice that answered was gruff and tired. "This is Hayes." "Admiral," Dylan said. "We have the daughter, but we're hot. Need extraction." There was a pause. Then Admiral Marcus Hayes' voice came back. Stronger now. "Bring her to the Naval Hospital. I'll have a security team waiting." "And Dylan?" "Yes, sir. Thank you for Sarah, for Emma, for everything." The line went dead. Dylan looked at Emma. "We're going to San Diego, to Naval Medical Center. Your mother's friend is there. He's going to keep you safe while we figure out how to get your mother back." Emma wiped her eyes. "The friend who was shot? The one who's dying?" Dylan nodded. "Admiral Marcus Hayes, the first man your mother saved in Kandahar. He's been looking for her for 18 years. And now that he's found her, he's not going to let anything happen to you." Behind them, the SUVs were gaining ground. Cypher was driving like a professional, weaving through traffic. But the pursuers were good. They weren't falling back. "We're not going to make it to the airport," Tank said. "They're going to box us in." Dylan made a decision. "Cypher, take the next exit. Head for the harbor." "The harbor?" Cypher asked. "Trust me," Dylan said. They exited the highway and drove through the industrial district of Baltimore. Old warehouses, abandoned factories, and ahead, the docks. Container ships and cargo cranes silhouetted against the afternoon sky. Dylan made another call. This one was answered immediately. "We're 2 minutes out. Light her up." The sedan skidded to a stop at the end of a pier. Emma looked around, confused. There was nothing here but water and old shipping containers. Then she heard it. A sound that started low and built to a roar. The sound of turbine engines spooling up. From behind one of the cargo ships, a helicopter rose into view. Not a civilian helicopter. A UH-60 Blackhawk. Military grade. Armed. "That's our ride," Dylan said. The Blackhawk touched down on the pier. The side door slid open and a crew chief waved them forward. Dylan grabbed Emma and ran, Tank and Cypher right behind them. They piled into the helicopter just as the pursuing SUVs screeched to a stop at the base of the pier. Contractors jumped out, weapons raised. But before they could fire, the Blackhawk was already lifting off, gaining altitude fast. Within seconds, they were out of range, flying over the Chesapeake Bay toward the open ocean. Emma sat in the jump seat, shaking. Dylan handed her a headset so she could hear over the noise of the rotors. "You're safe now," he said. "We're going to San Diego. We're going to get your mother back. I promise you that." Emma looked at him with her mother's eyes. "How? If they have her locked up in a facility with armed guards, how are you going to get her back?" Dylan's expression hardened, "The same way your mother got me back from death 18 years ago. With no plan, no backup, an absolute refusal to accept that it's impossible. The helicopter flew west, chasing the sunset. And in the cargo hold, Tank was on the phone with Naval Intelligence coordinating the next phase of the operation. The phase where SEAL Team 7 stopped playing defense and started playing offense. The phase where they went to war with Aegis Biomedical. In the Aegis laboratory, Sarah was alone again. Vance had left to coordinate the trial volunteers. Sarah had maybe an hour before they brought the subjects in and forced her to begin the protocol. 1 hour to figure out how to escape, how to save Emma, how to stop this. She looked at the vials of RT7 on the counter. 12 vials, each one containing enough of the alien-derived compound to either save a life or end one. Each one representing a choice she had made 18 years ago without knowing the consequences. Sarah thought about the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. She had violated that oath the day she injected 12 dying SEALs with an experimental drug. Had violated it knowing that she was playing God with leaves that weren't hers to gamble with. And now those men were dying because of her choices. But they had also lived. For 18 years they had lived, had served their country, had protected people who would never know their names, had mattered. Wasn't 18 years better than nothing? Wasn't a short life fully lived better than dying in a desert tent at 24 years old? Sarah didn't know the answer, wasn't sure there was an answer. She pulled up Admiral Hayes' notes again, read through his observations, his medical history, his slow realization that the miracle that had saved him was killing him. And in the final entry, dated 1 week ago, she found something that made her breath catch. I don't regret it, any of it. Sarah Chen gave me 18 years I never should have had. I met my wife because of those years. Had my son, watched him grow up, served my country at the highest levels, changed lives, saved lives. Whatever time I have left, it's borrowed time. Time I was given by an angel who refused to let me die when dying would have been easier. If I could go back to that tent in Kandahar, knowing everything I know now, I would still choose to let her save me. I would still choose the Lazarus Protocol, even knowing the price, because some prices are worth paying. Sarah's vision blurred with tears. She had spent 18 years feeling guilty, feeling like she had played God and gotten it wrong, feeling like the Lazarus Protocol was her greatest mistake. But maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe it was exactly what it was supposed to be. A desperate act of compassion that gave 12 men a second chance at life, a chance they used well. The door opened. Vance returned, followed by guards escorting 12 men. The volunteers. They were contractors, mercenaries, men who fought for money instead of country, men who had agreed to risk their lives for the promise of enhancement. They looked at Sarah with a mixture of hope and fear. Dr. Chen, Vance said, your subjects are ready. Begin the protocol. Sarah stood up, looked at the 12 men, looked at the vials of RT7, looked at Agent Vance, and made a choice. No, Sarah said. Vance's expression darkened. Excuse me? I said no, I'm not doing this. I'm not creating super soldiers for you, and I'm not turning what I did into a weapon. Vance pulled out her phone, showed Sarah the photograph of Emma again. Your daughter dies. Right now. One phone call. Sarah met her eyes. Then you'll never get the protocol, because I'm the only one who knows how to make it work. And if you kill Emma, I'll die before I give you anything. It was a bluff, a desperate, insane bluff, but Sarah held Vance's gaze. Let her see the absolute certainty in her eyes. Vance stared at her for a long moment. Then she smiled. It was a cold, terrible smile. You think you're brave, Dr. Chen? You think you're protecting your daughter? Let me tell you something about myself. Something that will help you understand who you're dealing with. She stepped closer to Sarah. My name is Lisa Vance, but my maiden name was Lisa Chen. And 4 years ago, my brother David killed himself. Put a gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger because the PTSD from 2 tours in Iraq had destroyed him. Sarah felt the world stop. David Chen, her husband. You, Vance said, her voice shaking with rage. You were his wife. You were supposed to help him, support him. But you were too busy playing hero at that hospital. Too busy saving strangers to save your own husband. She grabbed Sarah by the throat and slammed her against the wall. David wrote me letters, told me how alone he felt, how you were never home, how you cared more about your patients than about him, how he begged you to quit, to spend time with him, to help him deal with the nightmares. And you told him you couldn't. You told him people needed you. Vance's eyes were filled with tears and fury. So yes, Dr. Chen, I know exactly what it's like to lose someone because a nurse decided that strangers were more important than family. And I have been waiting 4 years for the chance to make you feel what I felt. The chance to take away someone you love and watch you break. She released Sarah's throat and stepped back. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to perform the Lazarus protocol on these 12 men. You're going to do it perfectly. And when it works, when Aegis has what they need, I'm going to kill your daughter anyway. Because that's justice. That's what you deserve for letting my brother die. Sarah slumped against the wall, her mind reeling. Lisa Vance was David's sister. She had married into the Chen family, had been at the wedding, had held Emma when she was a baby, and now she wanted Emma dead. Not for money, not for Aegis, for revenge. Sarah looked at the 12 men waiting for the protocol, looked at Vance's face, twisted with grief and rage, looked at the vials of RT7 that represented both salvation and damnation, and realized that there was only one way out of this. She would have to die. But before she died, she would make sure that the Lazarus protocol died with her, that the knowledge in her head could never be used, never be weaponized. She would have to destroy everything, including herself. Sarah straightened up, looked at Vance with calm acceptance. All right, she said quietly. I'll do it. I'll give you the protocol, but I need one thing first. What? Vance asked suspiciously. I need to see my daughter. One last time. Video call, 5 minutes. I need to tell her I love her. After that, I'll do whatever you want. Vance considered. Then she nodded. 5 minutes. Make it count. She handed Sarah a phone. Sarah dialed Emma's number with shaking hands. The call connected. Emma's face appeared on the screen. She was in what looked like a hospital room. Her eyes were red from crying. Mom, Emma whispered. Are you okay? Sarah smiled, even though her heart was breaking. I'm okay, sweetheart. Are you safe? I'm at Naval Medical Center in San Diego. There are Navy SEALs everywhere. Commander Cross says they're going to rescue you. Sarah glanced at Vance. The agent was watching, listening. No privacy, no chance to communicate anything that might compromise Aegis. But Sarah didn't need privacy. She just needed 5 minutes to say goodbye to her daughter, to tell her everything that mattered. Emma, Sarah said, I need you to listen to me. I need you to know that everything I did, every choice I made, it was all worth it because it gave me you. You are the best thing I ever created, the best life I ever saved. She paused, fighting back tears. Your father, David, I loved him so much, and I failed him. I know that. I was so focused on saving everyone else that I didn't save the one person who needed me most. Don't make my mistakes, Emma. Don't let your work become more important than the people you love. Mom, Emma was crying now. You didn't fail Dad. He was sick. It wasn't your fault. Sarah shook her head. It was my fault, baby, and I have to live with that. But you don't. You get to learn from it. You get to be better than I was. She looked directly into the camera. I love you, Emma Chen, more than my own life. And I'm sorry I won't be there to see you graduate, to see you become a doctor, to see you change the world the way I know you will. Mom, what are you saying? I'm saying goodbye, sweetheart. And I'm saying thank you for being my daughter, for being my purpose, for being proof that I did at least one thing right. The call ended. Vance took the phone back. Satisfied? Vance asked. Sarah nodded. Now I'll give you what you want. She walked to the counter, picked up the first vial of RT7, and dropped it on the floor. The glass shattered. The liquid spilled across the tiles, spreading like mercury. What are you doing? Vance screamed. Sarah picked up the second vial and dropped it. Then the third. The fourth. Vance was running toward her, but Sarah was faster. She swept her arm across the counter, sending all 12 vials crashing to the floor. Stop her! Vance shrieked. Guards rushed forward, but Sarah was already moving to the refrigerated cabinet. She ripped it open, grabbed the reserve samples of RT7, and threw them against the wall. Glass and liquid everywhere. Vance hit Sarah from behind, slamming her to the floor. They struggled, Vance's hands around Sarah's throat, squeezing. Sarah couldn't breathe, couldn't fight back. The world was going dark. And then the wall exploded. Not figuratively, literally. The exterior wall of the laboratory blew inward in a shower of concrete and rebar. The explosion was deafening. Sarah felt Vance's grip loosen as they were both thrown backward by the blast wave. Through the smoke and dust, figures emerged. Men in tactical gear, moving with lethal precision. SEAL Team 7 had arrived. Dylan Cross was the first one through the breach. He saw Sarah on the floor, Vance beside her, and the guards reaching for their weapons. His pistol came up and 3 shots rang out in rapid succession. 3 guards down. Tank was right behind him, firing controlled bursts that drove the remaining guards into cover. Cypher moved to Sarah, checking her for injuries. "Ma'am," Cypher said, "can you move?" Sarah nodded, gasping for air. "Emma?" "Safe," Cypher said. "She's with Admiral Hayes at the hospital. We need to get you out of here." Vance was crawling toward a panic button on the wall. Dylan saw her and fired. The shot hit inches from her hand, stopping her. "Don't move," Dylan commanded. Vance froze. Sarah struggled to her feet. She looked at the shattered vials on the floor, at the spilled RT-7 that was already evaporating into nothing, at the destroyed samples that could never be recovered. "It's gone," Sarah said. "All of it. Every sample, every record. I destroyed it all." Dylan looked at the devastation. Then he looked at Sarah with something like respect. "Good," he said. "Let's go home." They exfiltrated through the breach, moving fast through the corridors of the Aegis facility. Alarms were blaring. More guards were coming. But SEAL Team 7 had planned for this. They had backup teams, extraction vehicles, air support. Within 10 minutes, Sarah was in a helicopter flying over the California desert. Within an hour, she was landing at Naval Medical Center, San Diego. Within 90 minutes, she was walking into a hospital room where her daughter was waiting. Emma ran to her. They held each other and cried. And for the first time in 4 years, Sarah felt like maybe she could forgive herself. Maybe she could let go of the guilt over David. Maybe she could accept that she had done her best, even when her best hadn't been enough. "Commander Cross," a voice said. Dylan turned to see Admiral Marcus Hayes in the doorway. The Admiral was in a wheelchair, his chest bandaged, but his eyes were clear and strong. "Thank you," the Admiral said, "for bringing her back." "Both of them." Dylan saluted. "Just paying my debts, sir, same as you taught us." The Admiral smiled. Then he looked at Sarah. "Dr. Chen, we need to talk. About what comes next. About the other SEALs who are dying. About whether there's any way to save them." Sarah wiped her eyes. She looked at Emma, then at Dylan, then at the Admiral. "I don't know if there's a cure," Sarah said honestly, "but I'll spend whatever time I have left trying to find one. That's what I do. I save lives, even when it's impossible." "Especially then," Dylan said. And in that moment, Sarah Chen realized something. She wasn't done. The Lazarus Protocol might be destroyed. The RT-7 samples might be gone. But the 12 men who had been saved were still alive, still fighting. And as long as they fought, she would fight with them. Because that was what angels did. They stood between the darkness and the light, and they refused to let go. No matter what it cost. The hospital room at Naval Medical Center, San Diego was quiet, except for the steady beep of heart monitors and the soft hiss of oxygen flowing through nasal cannulas. Sarah Chen sat beside Admiral Marcus Hayes' bed, watching the rise and fall of his chest, counting the seconds between breaths. She had been counting for 3 hours now. 3 hours since SEAL Team 7 had extracted her from the Aegis facility. 3 hours since she had destroyed the last samples of RT-7 in existence. 3 hours since she had made herself the only remaining source of the Lazarus Protocol. Emma was asleep in the chair across the room, her head tilted at an angle that would leave her neck sore when she woke. She had refused to leave her mother's side, refused to go to the secure quarters that Naval Intelligence had offered. Sarah didn't blame her. After what Emma had been through, being hunted across Johns Hopkins campus by armed contractors, she needed to see that her mother was real and safe and alive. Sarah reached out and touched Emma's hand gently. Her daughter stirred but didn't wake. Sarah pulled back and returned her attention to Admiral Hayes. He looked worse than he had 18 years ago in that tent in Kandahar. Back then he had been 40 years old, strong and vital despite the shrapnel in his chest. Now he was 58 but looked 70. The RT-7 that had saved his life was consuming him from the inside out. His skin had a grayish tint. His breathing was labored. The gunshot wounds he had sustained were healing slower than they should, even with his enhanced physiology. He was dying. Maybe not today, maybe not this week, but soon. The door opened quietly. Commander Dylan Cross entered, moving with that careful silence that came from years of sneaking up on enemies. He looked at Emma sleeping, then at Sarah, then at the Admiral. "How is he?" Dylan asked softly. Sarah checked the monitors. "Stable. For now." The bullets missed his heart by millimeters. One is lodged near his spine. The surgeons want to operate, but they're worried his body won't handle the trauma. Dylan nodded. He pulled up a chair and sat down heavily. He looked exhausted. Sarah realized she had never seen him look tired before. SEALs weren't supposed to get tired. But the last 72 hours had pushed even Dylan's enhanced endurance to its limits. Commander? Commander, Sarah said, when was the last time you slept? Dylan smiled slightly. 48 hours ago, give or take. You need to rest. So do you, ma'am. But neither of us will. Not until this is finished. Sarah looked at him. What do you mean finished? It is finished. I destroyed the RT-7 samples. Aegis can't recreate the protocol. The threat is over. Dylan shook his head. The threat is just beginning. Aegis knows you escaped. They know the samples are destroyed. And they know that you're the only person left who has the knowledge to recreate it. He leaned forward. Agent Vance got away during the extraction. She's still out there, still working for Aegis, and she still wants you dead, not just for the protocol, for revenge, for her brother. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She had tried not to think about Lisa Vance's revelation, about the fact that David's sister blamed her for his death, about the fact that Vance was right. Sarah had failed David, had been so consumed with saving strangers that she hadn't saved her own husband. What are we going to do? Sarah asked. Dylan's expression hardened. We're going to finish what the Admiral started. We're going to expose Aegis, show the world what they've been doing, the illegal experiments, the test subjects who died, the Pentagon contracts that funded it all. He pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah a series of documents. Files that Cypher had recovered from the Aegis facility during the extraction. Internal memos, financial records, emails between Aegis executives and Pentagon officials. Evidence. This goes all the way to the top, Dylan said. Defense contractors making billions on black budget programs. Pentagon officials approving experiments that violate the Geneva Convention. Senators taking campaign donations from companies that are literally killing American soldiers in the name of research. Sarah scanned through the files. The scope of it was staggering. Aegis Biomedical was just one company in a network of dozens, all of them working on enhancement programs, all of them chasing the dream of creating super soldiers, all of them failing, and all of them leaving trails of dead test subjects in their wake. If we release this, Sarah said, it will destroy careers, maybe bring down the entire military-industrial complex around this type of research. Good, Dylan said. Let it burn. Maybe then the next nurse who tries to save lives won't get hunted for doing the right thing. Before Sarah could respond, Admiral Hayes stirred. His eyes opened, unfocused at first, then sharpening as he recognized where he was. He saw Sarah and a smile crossed his face. Angel, he whispered. His voice was rough, damaged. You came back. Sarah moved to his bedside. I'm here, Admiral. You're safe. Hayes tried to sit up, but pain stopped him. He gasped, his hand going to his chest. Sarah gently pushed him back down. Don't move. You have 2 bullets in you, and the doctors say one wrong twist could paralyze you. Then I guess I won't be doing any gymnastics, Hayes said. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. When he finally caught his breath, he looked at Sarah with serious eyes. Did you destroy it? The RT-7? Sarah nodded. Every sample, every vial, it's gone. Hayes closed his eyes. Thank God. I was so afraid Aegis would get it, would use it. They still might, Dylan said. If they get to Dr. Chen, she's the only one left who knows the protocol. Hayes opened his eyes again. Then we protect her. We make her disappear. New identity, witness protection. Sarah shook her head. I'm not running, I'm not hiding, and I'm not letting the 12 of you die without trying to help. Hayes stared at her. What are you talking about? Sarah pulled up a chair close to his bed. Admiral, I've been looking at the medical files on the USB drive your son gave me. The genetic analysis of all 12 SEALs who received RT-7. I've seen the degradation, the cellular breakdown, the cancers that are forming. She paused. RT-7 is killing you. All of you, and I think I know why. Dylan leaned forward. Tell us. Sarah took a breath. RT-7 wasn't designed for long-term use. It's a compound derived from non-human biological samples. When I injected it into you 18 years ago, your bodies recognized it as foreign. Your immune system should have rejected it immediately, but the trauma you were experiencing, the blood loss, the shock, it suppressed your immune response just enough for the RT-7 to integrate into your cells. She pulled up a diagram on her own tablet, a complex chart showing genetic markers and cellular structures. For the first few years, the RT-7 enhanced you, made you stronger, faster, better. But your immune systems never fully accepted mod. They've been fighting it this whole time. A low-level war inside your bodies. And after 18 years, your immune systems are losing. The RT7 is breaking down into toxic metabolites. Those toxins are causing the cancers, the organ failures. Hayes absorbed this. Is there a cure? Sarah met his eyes. I don't know, but I think there might be a treatment. Something that could slow the degradation. Maybe even stop it. What? Dylan asked. Me, Sarah said simply. The room went silent. Sarah continued. When I was working on you in Kandahar, I got RT7 on my hands. I had cuts, lacerations from the surgical tools. The RT7 entered my bloodstream. I should have experienced the same enhancement, the same degradation as you, but I didn't. She held up her arm, showing the veins beneath her skin. I had my blood analyzed while I was at Aegis. My body didn't integrate the RT7 the way yours did. My immune system attacked it immediately and developed antibodies. Antibodies that neutralized the RT7 before it could change my DNA. Dylan's eyes widened. You're immune, Sarah nodded. And I think those antibodies could be used to create a treatment, a serum that would help your immune systems fight the RT7 degradation. It won't reverse the damage that's already been done, but it might stop it from getting worse. Hayes looked at her with something like hope. How do we make this serum? We don't, Sarah said. I do. With the right equipment and enough time, I can isolate the antibodies from my blood and synthesize them. Create a treatment that could save all of you. How much time? Dylan asked. Weeks, maybe months. Sarah looked at Admiral Hayes. I don't know if you have that long. Hayes smiled weakly. Then I guess you better get started. But there was a problem. Sarah didn't have weeks or months, because even as they were having this conversation, Agent Lisa Vance was making her own plans. 3 miles away, in a rented house in the hills above San Diego, Vance sat at a laptop computer and watched the surveillance feeds from Naval Medical Center. She couldn't get cameras inside the hospital itself. Military security was too tight, but she had eyes on every entrance, every exit, every road leading to the facility. She knew Sarah Chen was inside, knew Emma was with her, knew that SEAL Team 7 was providing security, and she knew that eventually Sarah would have to leave, would have to go somewhere to begin work on this supposed cure. And when she did, Vance would be waiting. Sitting across from her was Marcus Reeves, CEO of Aegis Biomedical. He was 55 years old, silver-haired, and wore the expression of someone who had never been told no in his entire life. He had been talking for 20 minutes straight, his voice rising with each passing minute. This is unacceptable, Reeves said, pacing the small living room. We had her. We had the protocol. And your incompetence allowed her to destroy 18 years of research. Vance turned to look at him slowly. Her eyes were cold, empty. My incompetence? Your facility had a hole blown in the wall by Navy SEALs. Your security team was neutralized in under 3 minutes. Don't lecture me about incompetence, Marcus. Reeves stopped, pacing, and pointed a finger at her. I don't care about excuses. The board is demanding answers. We've spent $500 million on the RT7 program. We have nothing to show for it. The Pentagon is threatening to pull our contracts. Our stock price has dropped 30%. He leaned over the table, his face red. I brought you into this operation because you said you could deliver Sarah Chen. You said your personal connection would give us leverage. Instead, you've cost us everything. Vance stood up slowly. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, dangerous. Personal connection? You mean my dead brother? The one your company's research is supposed to honor? Reeves waved his hand dismissively. David Chen was a useful narrative. A Marine who suffered from PTSD. It gave the RT7 program a human face, made it easier to secure funding. Vance's hand moved to the pistol on the table. She didn't pick it up, just rested her fingers on the grip. You used my brother's death as a marketing tool? Reeves didn't seem to notice the shift in her demeanor. Of course. That's business, Lisa. We use every asset available. Your brother's suicide, tragic as it was, helped us secure a $300 million contract extension. He turned back to his laptop. Now we need a new strategy. If we can't get the protocol from Sarah Chen willingly, we'll have to extract it by force. I've authorized the procurement of enhanced interrogation specialists. We'll make her talk. Vance picked up the pistol. Her hand was steady, perfectly calm. Marcus, she said. Reeves looked up from his laptop. What? You talk about my brother like he was a line item in a budget report. Like his pain, his death, meant nothing except as a way to make money. Reeves frowned. I don't have time for sentimentality, Lisa. We have a crisis to manage. Vance raised the pistol and shot Marcus Reeves twice in the chest. The sound was deafening in the small room. Reeves stumbled backward, his hands going to his chest, his expensive suit blooming red. He tried to speak, but only blood came out. His legs gave way and he collapsed onto the hardwood floor. Vance stood over him and watched him die. Watched the confusion in his eyes, the disbelief that the world had stopped obeying his commands. It took 43 seconds. She counted each one. When it was done, when Marcus Reeves was nothing more than an expensive corpse on a rental house floor, Vance felt nothing. No satisfaction, no remorse, just the cold emptiness that had lived inside her since the day the Marines had come to her door to tell her that David was dead. She had thought working for Aegis would give her purpose, thought that helping to create enhanced soldiers would honor David's memory. But now she understood the truth. Aegis didn't care about soldiers, didn't care about sacrifice. They cared about profit margins and stock prices. And Sarah Chen, the woman who had failed to save David, was going to pay for that. Not because Aegis wanted her to, because Vance needed her to. Vance pulled out her phone and made a call. The voice that answered was rough, professional. "This is Blackwater." "I need a team," Vance said, stepping over Reeves' body as she walked to the window. 12 men, former special operations, willing to engage active duty SEALs. Pay is $2 million total, half up front. There was a pause. "What's the target?" "Naval Medical Center, San Diego. We're extracting a high-value individual. Expect heavy resistance." "When?" "Tonight. I'll send coordinates." Vance ended the call. She looked down at Reeves one more time. Then she opened a closet and pulled out a large duffel bag. Inside were weapons, cash, false identification documents. Everything she needed to disappear after this was over. She had made her choice. This wasn't about Aegis anymore. This wasn't about enhanced soldiers or military contracts. This was about Sarah Chen, about making the woman who had let David die understand what it felt like to lose everything. Vance checked her watch. 6 hours until the contractors arrived. 6 hours to set everything in motion. She walked out of the house without looking back, leaving Marcus Reeves to bleed out alone on the floor. Back at the hospital, Sarah was in the research laboratory, bent over a microscope. She'd been working for 4 hours straight, isolating antibodies from her blood samples, running tests, building protocols. Emma was with her, helping despite having no real understanding of the science, just wanting to be close to her mother. Dylan and Tank stood guard outside the lab. Cypher was monitoring security feeds. The rest of SEAL Team 7 was spread throughout the hospital, maintaining a defensive perimeter. But they were exhausted, running on fumes, and exhausted soldiers made mistakes. At 2:45 in the morning, a delivery truck pulled up to the hospital's service entrance. The driver showed identification, a manifest, said he was delivering medical supplies. The security guard, tired from a double shift, waved him through without calling for verification. The truck drove into the underground loading dock, parked in the shadows between two support columns, and 12 men in hospital maintenance uniforms got out, moving with the silent precision of operators who had done this 1,000 times before. They had been given detailed floor plans, knew exactly where the research laboratory was located, knew exactly how many guards to expect. Someone had given them everything they needed. At 2:58, Cypher saw them on the security feeds. His eyes widened and he keyed his radio immediately. "Commander, we have unknowns in the building. 12 contacts, ground floor, moving toward the research wing." Dylan was moving before Cypher finished speaking. "Tank, with me." "Cypher, lock down the lab. Nobody gets in or out." But Cypher was already typing, trying to engage the security protocols, and finding that they wouldn't respond. Someone with administrative access had overridden the system 30 minutes ago. "Commander, the security system is compromised. I can't lock anything down." Dylan cursed and broke into a run, Tank beside him despite his injured leg. Behind them, the other SEALs were mobilizing, but the hospital was massive. 5 floors, hundreds of rooms, miles of corridors, and the contractors had a head start. In the laboratory, Sarah heard the alarms begin to wail, saw the lights flash red, emergency protocols activating. She looked at Emma and saw the fear in her daughter's eyes. "It's them," Emma whispered. "They found us." Sarah grabbed Emma's hand. "We need to go. Now." But when she tried the door, it wouldn't open. Someone had locked it remotely. They were trapped. Sarah looked around the lab desperately. One door, no windows, no other exits. She pulled out her phone to call Dylan, but there was no signal. Someone was jamming communications. She was a nurse, not a soldier. She had no weapons, no training in combat, nothing but her medical knowledge and her absolute refusal to let her daughter die. She looked at the equipment around her, the microscopes, the centrifuges, the chemical reagents stored in locked cabinets, and she started to form a plan. "Emma," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her, "help me move this table. We're going to barricade the door." They pushed a heavy lab table against the door, then another, then a filing cabinet. It wouldn't stop armed men for long, but it might buy them precious minutes. Sarah grabbed bottles of chemicals from the storage cabinet: hydrochloric acid, sodium hydroxide, ethanol. She had learned basic chemistry in nursing school, had worked enough years in hospitals to know what happened when certain compounds mixed. She started combining them in a large beaker, creating something that would burn and smoke and maybe, just maybe, give them a fighting chance. "Mom, what are you doing?" Emma asked, her voice shaking. Sarah looked at her daughter and forced a smile. "Something your father taught me. Before the PTSD, before the nightmares, back when we were happy, he taught me that sometimes the best defense is making the enemy think twice about attacking." She held up the beaker, now filled with a volatile mixture. "This is going to create a lot of smoke and some fire when they breach that door. The smoke will be caustic, hard to see through, hard to breathe. We're going to use it to cover our escape." "Escape where?" Emma looked around the sealed room. "Mom, there's no other way out." Sarah pointed up at the ventilation grate in the ceiling, just visible above the fluorescent lights. "There is, if we're small enough and desperate enough." Outside the lab, the 12 contractors reached the third floor. They moved in perfect formation, weapons raised, infrared scopes cutting through the dim emergency lighting. The team leader checked his tactical display, which showed the layout of the floor and the heat signatures of 2 people barricaded inside Laboratory 316. He listened to the voice in his earpiece, Agent Vance's voice, cold and precise. "Rules of engagement are simple. Kill everyone except Sarah Chen. We need her alive and functional. The daughter is expendable." The leader nodded to his team. They stacked up outside the laboratory door in a practice assault formation. One man placed a breaching charge on the hinges, shaped explosive designed to blow the door inward without bringing down the ceiling or causing a fire that would endanger the target. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Breach. The explosion was deafening. The door blew inward, slamming into the barricade that Sarah and Emma had built. The heavy table held for 2 seconds, then collapsed under the force, the filing cabinet toppling sideways. The contractors poured through the opening, weapons sweeping the room. But instead of clear air, they met a wall of thick, caustic smoke. Sarah had thrown her chemical mixture the moment the door blew, and it had ignited on contact with the breached charge's residual heat. The smoke was choking, blinding. The contractors' thermal scopes were useless, overwhelmed by the heat signature of the burning chemicals. Above them, in the narrow ventilation duct, Sarah and Emma were crawling as fast as they could. Sarah's shoulders scraped against the metal sides. Her knees screamed in pain, but she kept moving, kept pulling Emma along behind her, trying to put distance between them and the men hunting them. Behind them, they could hear the contractors entering the ventilation system, hear their breathing echoing through the metal ducts, hear the scrape of gear against aluminum. They were being hunted like animals. Sarah reached an intersection in the ductwork. She could go left toward the main hospital, where there would be more people, more witnesses, but also more potential hostages. Or right toward the maintenance areas, where there would be isolation, dead ends, but fewer civilians in danger. She went right. She would not let innocent people die because of her. They crawled for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Sarah's hands were bleeding from the sharp edges of the metal. Emma was crying silently, trying not to make noise that would give away their position. Then Sarah saw it. Light ahead. An exit grate. She crawled faster, reached it, tried to push it open with her bleeding hands. It was screwed shut from the outside. Sarah looked around desperately. No tools. No way to open it. Behind them, the contractors were getting closer. She could see flashlight beams cutting through the darkness of the ductwork, like searchlights hunting for prey. "Emma," Sarah whispered, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. When I tell you to, I need you to scream as loud as you can, as loud as you've ever screamed in your life. Can you do that?" Emma nodded, terrified but trusting. Sarah took one of the chemical bottles she had brought with her. The hydrochloric acid. She poured it carefully on the screws holding the grate in place. The acid hissed and smoked, eating through the metal with frightening speed. Now, Emma, scream! Emma screamed, a piercing, terrified sound that echoed through the ventilation system like a siren. The contractors heard it and came running, their boots thundering through the ducts. The screws dissolved. Sarah kicked the grate with everything she had, every ounce of strength born from 18 years of lifting patients and equipment. It fell away, and she and Emma tumbled out into darkness. They landed hard on a concrete floor, storage room, medical supplies stacked on metal shelves, and a door with a glowing exit sign above it. Sarah grabbed Emma and ran, slammed through the door into a corridor bathed in red emergency lighting. She could hear footsteps behind her, voices shouting in tactical shorthand. She ran blindly, Emma's hand clutched in hers, looking for anywhere to hide, anywhere to make a stand, anywhere that wasn't a dead end. Then she heard it. Not behind her, ahead of her, the distinctive sound of suppressed gunfire. SEAL Team 7 had found the contractors. The corridor erupted in violence. Dylan and Tank appeared from a side hallway, weapons up, engaging the contractors who had followed Sarah and Emma out of the ventilation system. The gunfire was precise, controlled, professional. 3 contractors went down in the first 5 seconds. Then 4, the rest fell back, seeking cover behind medical equipment and doorways. "Dr. Chen!" Dylan shouted over the chaos. "This way!" Sarah ran toward him, pulling Emma. Dylan grabbed them both and shoved them behind a concrete pillar that had supported the ceiling. Tank was laying down covering fire, his rifle barking in short, controlled bursts that drove the contractors back. "How many?" Dylan asked Sarah between shots. 12 total, Sarah gasped, struggling to catch her breath. At least 8 still active. Dylan keyed his radio. "All stations, this is Reaper. We have the package. Converging on our position. Need immediate extraction." The response came back broken by static. Someone was still jamming communications. But Dylan's team was well-trained. They didn't need perfect comms. They knew the rally points. They knew the extraction protocols. The contractors were regrouping, preparing for another assault. Dylan checked his ammunition. 3 magazines left. Tank had 4. Not enough for a sustained firefight against 8 trained operators. "We need to move," Dylan said. "Service elevator at the end of this corridor. We get to the roof. We extract by air." Sarah looked at Emma. Her daughter was pale, shaking violently, but alive. That was all that mattered in this moment. "Let's go," Sarah said. They moved as a unit. Dylan on point, weapon up, scanning for threats. Tank on rear security, walking backward, covering their 6. Sarah and Emma in the middle, staying low. They reached the elevator. Dylan hit the button. Nothing happened. Someone had cut the power to all non-emergency systems. "Stairs," Tank said, pointing to an emergency exit with his rifle barrel. They went through the door into the stairwell. Started climbing, 1 floor, 2 floors. Behind them, they could hear the contractors entering the stairwell, their boots echoing like drums in the concrete shaft. At the 4th floor landing, Dylan stopped. He pulled a small device from his vest. A Claymore mine. Directional, lethal. He placed it on the wall, angled down the stairwell, and activated it with a remote detonator. "Keep going," he told Sarah and Tank. "I'll slow them down." They climbed. 5th floor, 6th, 7th. Sarah's legs were burning with lactic acid. Emma was gasping for air. But they kept climbing because stopping meant dying. Behind them, the Claymore detonated. The explosion was massive, shaking the entire stairwell. The sound was like the end of the world. Men screamed. But when the echoes faded and the smoke cleared, the contractors were still coming. Fewer of them now, but still coming. 8th floor. Dylan kicked open the roof access door with his boot. They burst out onto the rooftop. The night air was cold and clear, shocking after the smoke and chaos inside. The city lights of San Diego spread out below them like a fallen constellation. And hovering 50 feet above them, rotors beating the air into submission, was a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter. Dylan's extraction bird, right on schedule despite the jammed communications. The Black Hawk descended rapidly. The side door slid open and a crew chief in a flight helmet waved them forward urgently. They ran toward the helicopter, 20 feet, 15, 10. Then gunfire erupted from the roof access door. The contractors had reached the roof. Tank went down. A bullet caught him in the thigh, the same leg that had been wounded before. He fell hard, cursing in Spanish, his rifle clattering across the rooftop. Dylan turned and fired back. suppressing the contractors with controlled bursts. But there were too many of them spreading out across the roof, taking cover behind HVAC units and ventilation stacks. Sarah didn't think. Training and instinct took over. She ran back to Tank, grabbed him under the arms, and started dragging him toward the helicopter. He was massive, easily 250 pounds of muscle and gear, but adrenaline gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. Emma helped, small as she was. Together they pulled the wounded SEAL across the rooftop, inch by agonizing inch. Dylan was backing toward them, firing controlled bursts. His rifle clicked, empty. He dropped the magazine, slapped in a fresh one, kept firing, covering them with his body between them and the contractors. They reached the helicopter. The crew chief grabbed Tank and pulled him into the cabin with practiced efficiency. Then Emma, then Sarah. Dylan was 5 feet from the helicopter when he went down. A bullet caught him high in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell to one knee, his rifle slipping from his grip. Sarah screamed. She jumped out of the helicopter and ran to him, every instinct that made her a healer overriding every instinct of self-preservation. She grabbed his tactical vest and pulled. He was heavy, wounded, but she refused to let go. "Get up!" she shouted over the rotor noise and gunfire. "I didn't save your life 18 years ago so you could die on a rooftop in San Diego. I didn't pull you back from death in that tent so you could quit now. Get up!" Dylan looked at her with those clear blue eyes, the same eyes she had seen in Kandahar, the same determination, the same absolute refusal to quit fighting. He got up. Together, they staggered to the helicopter. The crew chief grabbed Dylan and pulled him in. Sarah climbed in after him. The pilot didn't wait for confirmation. The Black Hawk lifted off immediately, gaining altitude with stomach dropping speed. Below them, on the rooftop, the contractors fired. Bullets pinged off the helicopter's armored hull, sounding like hail on a tin roof. But they were already out of effective range, already safe. Sarah collapsed against the bulkhead, her whole body shaking with adrenaline crash. Emma crawled to her, and they held each other, both crying, both alive, both grateful for one more minute of existence. Across the cabin, a medic was already working on Dylan's shoulder wound. Tank was sitting up, his leg being bandaged, grinning despite the pain. "You know, ma'am," Dylan said through gritted teeth as the medic probed for the bullet, "I'm starting to think you're more dangerous than we are." Sarah laughed. It was a slightly hysterical sound, born of relief and exhaustion and the simple joy of being alive. But it felt good. It felt like winning. The helicopter flew through the night sky, heading for a secure location outside the city. And below them, Agent Lisa Vance stood in the parking lot of Naval Medical Center, watching the Black Hawk disappear into the darkness. She had lost again. Sarah Chen had escaped again. Emma was still alive. The contractors were dead or scattered. But Vance wasn't done, not yet, not even close. Because while the battle on the roof had been raging, while SEAL Team 7 had been focused on protecting Sarah and Emma, Vance had been inside the hospital, inside the research laboratory where Sarah had been working. And she had taken something that Sarah had left behind in her desperate flight. Blood samples. Vials of Sarah's blood, carefully labeled and stored. The antibodies that could cure the dying SEALs. The antibodies that were the key to everything. Vance looked at the insulated case in her hands, smiled coldly. Sarah Chen might have escaped, but she had left behind the one thing Vance could use against her. The one thing that would force Sarah to come out of hiding. The cure. Vance got into her car and drove away from the hospital. She had calls to make, plans to finalize, a trap to set. The final trap. The one that would end with Sarah Chen's death and Lisa Vance's revenge. The hunt wasn't over. It was just entering its final phase. And this time there would be no escape. The safe house was 40 miles east of San Diego, hidden in the desert scrubland where the city lights faded into darkness and the only sound was the wind moving through the sage. It was a single-story concrete structure that looked abandoned from the outside but was reinforced with steel blast doors and equipped with enough weapons and communications gear to run a small war. Sarah Chen sat at a makeshift medical station in the corner, her hands moving with practiced precision as she stitched up the bullet wound in Commander Dylan Cross's shoulder. He sat perfectly still, jaw clenched against the pain, refusing medication because he needed to stay sharp. Across the room, Tank lay on a cot with his leg elevated and freshly bandaged. The bullet had passed through muscle without hitting bone. He would limp for weeks, but he would live. Emma was in the back bedroom, finally sleeping after Sarah had given her a mild sedative. Her daughter had been shaking uncontrollably. the adrenaline crash hitting her hard after the rooftop escape. Sarah had sat with her for an hour, holding her hand, until Emma's breathing had finally steadied into sleep. There, Sarah said, tying off the final suture on Dylan's shoulder. You'll have another scar to add to your collection. Dylan rotated his shoulder carefully, testing the range of motion. His face was pale from blood loss, but his eyes were clear. Good work, ma'am. You should have been a surgeon. I was a nurse who did surgery once, Sarah said quietly. Under circumstances I never wanted to repeat. She started cleaning up the medical supplies, organizing them with the automatic efficiency that came from 3 decades in emergency medicine. But her hands were shaking slightly. The events of the night were catching up to her. The ventilation chase, the gunfight, nearly losing Dylan on that rooftop. Ma'am, Dylan said gently, you should rest. You've been going for almost 24 hours straight. Sarah shook her head. I can't. Not yet. Not until I know we're secure. Cypher was at the communications console, his face lit by the glow of multiple screens. Commander, he said without looking away from the monitors, you need to see this. Dylan stood, wincing at the pain in his shoulder, and walked over. Sarah followed. What Cypher showed them made Sarah's blood run cold. Security footage from the hospital research laboratory, timestamped 0430 hours, 90 minutes after the extraction, while the firefight had still been raging on the upper floors. The video showed Agent Lisa Vance entering the laboratory. She was alone, moving quickly but carefully like someone who knew exactly what she was looking for. She went straight to the refrigerated storage unit where Sarah had been keeping the blood samples for analysis. She's stealing the antibodies, Sarah whispered, her voice hollow. On the screen, Vance loaded vials into an insulated case. A dozen vials, all of Sarah's work from the past 12 hours. The isolated antibodies that could be synthesized into a cure for the RT7 degradation. The only samples in existence. Vance closed the case and turned toward the camera. For a moment, she looked directly into the lens. Her face was eerily calm, almost peaceful. Then she raised her pistol and shot out the camera. The feed went dark. How did she get in? Dylan demanded. The hospital was locked down, military security everywhere. Cypher pulled up another screen. Hospital staff access logs. Someone with administrative credentials opened the research wing doors at 0427. 3 minutes before Vance arrived, he zoomed in on the access code. It belonged to Dr. Victor Sterling. Sterling, Sarah breathed, but he was being forced to help them. His sister was kidnapped. He wouldn't. Dylan's expression was grim. Maybe he didn't have a choice. Maybe he just still has leverage over him. Or maybe, Cypher said slowly, pulling up another file, maybe they don't anymore. He showed them a police report, filed at 0315 hours, 45 minutes before Vance entered the hospital. Officers responding to an anonymous tip had found a young woman, bound and gagged, in a storage unit in Chula Vista. Melissa Sterling, Victor Sterling's sister. She had been rescued, treated for dehydration and minor injuries, and was currently in protective custody. Sterling's sister was freed before Vance stole the samples, Sarah said. So why would he help Vance after that? He wouldn't, Dylan said, which means someone else used his credentials, someone who had access to the hospital security system. Cypher was already typing, checking the personnel files, cross-referencing. Then he stopped, his face grim. Vance had an accomplice. Someone on the inside, a hospital IT administrator named Robert Vance. Sarah's eyes widened. Vance related to Lisa? Cousin, Cypher confirmed. Hired 6 months ago. Background check should have flagged the connection, but somehow it was overlooked. He had full access to the security systems. Could have been feeding information to Lisa this entire time. Dylan slammed his fist on the table. Where is he now? Cypher pulled up the hospital's HR records. Called in sick this morning. Home address is listed as an apartment in National City, but I'm betting he's already gone. Track him, Dylan ordered. I want to know every move he makes and find out if Sterling knows about this. If his credentials were compromised, we need to make sure he's protected. On it, Cypher said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Sarah sank into a chair, the weight of the situation crushing down on her. The antibodies are gone. Without them, I can't create the cure. Admiral Hayes and the others will die. Dylan knelt in front of her chair, forcing her to meet his eyes. Ma'am, we're not done. Those antibodies came from you, from your blood, which means we can make more. Sarah shook her head. It took me 12 hours to isolate enough antibodies for those samples. 12 hours I had access to a fully equipped research laboratory. We don't have that anymore. We don't have the equipment. We don't have the time. Then we get the samples back, Dylan said simply. We find Vance, we take them from her, same as we've done with every other mission. She's expecting that, Sarah said. She knows I'll come for them. She's counting on it. This is a trap. Dylan smiled grimly. Then we spring the trap, but on our terms, not hers. Cypher pulled up new footage, traffic cameras, satellite imagery. He tracked Vance's vehicle leaving the hospital, followed it through the streets of San Diego, watched it pull into an industrial complex near the harbor. Warehouse district, Dylan said, studying the screen. Abandoned since the shipping companies moved south. Good place for a final stand. Cypher zoomed in on the building Vance had entered. Thermal imaging showed heat signatures, power consumption. The building was active despite being officially closed. She's setting up a lab, Sarah realized. She's going to try to synthesize the cure herself. Dylan shook his head. She doesn't have the knowledge. The antibodies are useless without the proper synthesis protocol. Without understanding the genetic sequences, the stabilization processes, the cellular mechanisms. He looked at Sarah. She's using them as bait. She knows you'll come for them, knows you need those samples to save the Admiral and the other SEALs. She's counting on you walking into her trap. Sarah met his eyes. Then I guess I'm walking into her trap. Ma'am, Dylan started. No, Sarah cut him off, her voice firm. Don't tell me it's too dangerous. Don't tell me there are other options. We both know there aren't. Those antibodies are the only samples we have. Without them, Admiral Hayes dies in weeks. The other SEALs follow. Everything I did in Kandahar, everything you've survived for 18 years, it all ends in failure. She stood up, her decision made, her voice steady despite the fear she felt. So yes, I'm walking into that warehouse, I'm getting those samples back. And I'm ending this with Lisa Vance once and for all. She lost her brother, and I understand that pain. I lost David too, but I won't let her grief destroy the lives of 12 men who deserve to live. Dylan was quiet for a long moment, studying her face, then he nodded. All right, ma'am, but you're not going alone. SEAL Team 7 doesn't leave anyone behind, and we sure as hell don't send angels into hell without backup. He turned to Cypher. Get me blueprints of that warehouse, access points, sight lines, security systems, every detail, and contact naval intelligence. Tell them we need authorization for direct action against a hostile target on U.S. soil. Cypher's fingers flew across the keyboard. On it, Commander. Tank sat up on his cot, testing his injured leg. I'm coming too. Dylan looked at the massive SEAL. You can barely walk. Tank grinned through the pain. Then I'll shoot from a sitting position. You're not doing this without me, boss. That woman and her contractors almost killed us. I owe her some payback. Dylan's expression softened. All right, but you're on overwatch. Sniper position. You don't move unless we're overrun. Tank nodded. Roger that. Dylan looked at Sarah. We move in 6 hours. That gives us time to plan, to rest, to prepare. When we go in hard and fast. Overwhelming force. We get the samples, we neutralize the threat, and we get out. He paused. And ma'am, when this is over, when we have those antibodies back, I want you to make me a promise. What promise? Sarah asked. Promise me you'll let us protect you, not just during this mission, but after. The 12 of us, we owe you our lives, twice over now. Let us spend the rest of those lives making sure you're safe, making sure you can do the work you were meant to do. Sarah felt tears prickling her eyes. Commander. Dylan shook his head. Not Commander. Dylan, we're family now, Dr. Chen, all of us. The 12 SEALs, you, Emma, were bound by blood and sacrifice in 18 years of borrowed time. And family protects each other. Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Good, Dylan said. Now get some rest. In 6 hours, we end this. But Sarah couldn't rest. While Dylan and Tank prepared weapons and Cypher built tactical plans, Sarah sat with Emma in the back bedroom. Her daughter had woken, the sedative wearing off, and was sitting up in bed looking small and fragile. Mom, Emma said quietly, I'm scared. Sarah took her hand. I know, sweetheart. I'm scared too. Emma looked at her with eyes that suddenly seemed much older. Are you going after her? After that woman who wants to kill you? Sarah nodded. I have to. She has the only cure that can save the Admiral and the others. Even if it means you might die. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke, choosing her words carefully. Emma, when I was in Afghanistan, when I saved those 12 men, I broke every rule. I performed surgery I wasn't qualified to do. I used medications I wasn't authorized to use. I risked everything because I believed those lives were worth saving. She squeezed Emma's hand. I still believe that. I believe Admiral Hayes and Commander Cross and all the others deserve to live. And if I have to walk into danger to give them that chance, then that's what I'll do. Because that's who I am. That's who your father fell in love with before the war broke him. Emma's eyes filled with tears. I don't want to lose you too. I already lost Dad. I can't lose you. Sarah pulled her daughter into her arms. You won't lose me. I promise I'm coming back. And when this is over, when we've saved those men, we're going to build the life we should have had. We're going to spend time together. We're going to heal. She pulled back and looked Emma in the eyes. And you're going to finish medical school. You're going to become the doctor I never got to be. You're going to save lives without having to break rules or risk everything. You're going to do it right. Emma nodded against her mother's shoulder. Okay, Mom. They sat together in the darkness, holding each other, until Cypher called out that it was time. 2 hours later, Sarah stood in the passenger seat of a black tactical van parked 3 blocks from the warehouse, watching the building through night vision binoculars. The structure was 3 stories tall, concrete and steel, with few windows and multiple exits. Exactly the kind of place you chose when you were expecting trouble and wanted control of the battlefield. Dylan was beside her, checking weapons with the methodical calm of someone who had done this hundreds of times. He had a suppressed rifle, 2 pistols, flash grenades, and enough ammunition to fight through a small army. Tank was already in position on the roof of an adjacent building, his sniper rifle trained on the warehouse entrance. The rest of SEAL Team 7 was spread out in the surrounding area, blocking escape routes and providing backup if things went sideways. Final check, Dylan said into his radio. All stations report. One by one, the SEALs checked in. Everyone was in position. Everyone was ready. Dylan looked at Sarah. Last chance to change your mind, ma'am. We can storm the building, extract the samples without you ever stepping inside. Sarah shook her head firmly. She wants me. If I don't show, she'll destroy the samples out of spite. This has to end with her and me. Face to face, she needs to understand that her brother's death wasn't my fault, that I did everything I could to save David. She met Dylan's eyes, and if she can't accept that, if she's too broken by grief to see reason, then at least I'll have tried. Dylan nodded slowly. All right, but I'm coming in with you. You go nowhere without me covering your 6. They got out of the van and walked toward the warehouse entrance together. The door was unlocked, an invitation. Sarah took a deep breath and pushed it open. The interior of the warehouse was vast and empty, shipping containers stacked along the walls, creating corridors and hiding places. Old machinery covered in dust and cobwebs. And in the center, under portable floodlights that created a pool of harsh white illumination, was a makeshift laboratory. Tables covered with equipment, centrifuges, microscopes, portable gene sequencers, and sitting in the middle of it all, the insulated case containing Sarah's blood samples. Agent Lisa Vance stood beside the case. She was alone, no contractors, no backup team, just her and a pistol lying on the table beside the samples. Sarah Chen, Vance said. She didn't pick up the weapon, didn't make any threatening moves. She just stood there looking tired and sound and utterly broken. I knew you'd come. Sarah walked forward slowly, Dylan staying close beside her, but not aiming his rifle. Not yet, giving Sarah space to do what she needed to do. Lisa, Sarah said softly, this doesn't have to end in violence. Give me the samples. Let me create the cure. Help me save the men who are dying. Vance laughed, but there was no humor in it, just hollow bitterness. Save them? Like you saved my brother? Sarah stopped 10 feet from the table. Her voice was gentle but firm. David's death wasn't my fault. He was sick. The war destroyed something inside him that I couldn't fix, that no one could fix. Vance's face twisted with anger. You could have tried harder. You could have been there for him instead of always being at that hospital, always saving strangers. She stepped towards Sarah, her hands clenched into fists. Do you know what his last words were? In the suicide note he left? He wrote, "Tell Sarah I'm sorry I wasn't worth saving." Sarah felt tears running down her face, the guilt she had carried for 4 years welling up like a physical wound. I know, I read that note 1,000 times, and every time I wished I could go back, wished I could make different choices. She took a breath. But I can't. I can't bring David back, and killing me won't bring him back either. It will just create more death, more suffering, more broken families. Vance looked down at the pistol on the table. Her hand moved toward it slowly. Dylan's rifle came up smoothly. "Ma'am, step away from the weapon." Vance smiled sadly. "Or what, Commander? You'll shoot me? A grieving woman seeking justice for her dead brother? Former federal agent seeking revenge," a voice said from the shadows. Everyone turned. Admiral Marcus Hayes stepped into the light, being pushed in a wheelchair by Lieutenant James Hayes, Jr. The Admiral looked like death barely warmed over. Pale, gaunt, but his eyes were clear and hard as diamonds. "You're under arrest, Lisa Vance," the Admiral said, his voice carrying the weight of command despite his physical weakness. "For the murder of Marcus Reeves, CEO of Aegis Biomedical. For conspiracy to commit murder. For theft of military property. For assaulting a federal medical facility." He paused, catching his breath. "The FBI found Reeves' body this morning. Ballistics matched the gun you're carrying. It's over, Agent Vance." Vance stared at him. "You should be dead. The doctor said you wouldn't survive the week without treatment." The Admiral smiled thinly. "I've been defying medical predictions for 18 years. Why stop now?" He looked at Sarah with something like fatherly affection. "Dr. Chen, take the samples. We have work to do." But Vance was faster than anyone expected. Her hand closed around the pistol, and she raised it in one smooth motion. Not at Sarah, not at Dylan or the Admiral. At the case containing the antibody samples. "If I can't have justice," Vance said, her voice breaking, "no one gets salvation." She fired. The bullet streaked toward the case. But Sarah was already moving. Years of emergency medicine had given her reflexes honed by crisis, the ability to act when others froze. She lunged forward and knocked the case off the table just as the second shot rang out. The case hit the floor hard. Sarah heard glass breaking inside, felt her heart stop. But when she opened the case with shaking hands, she saw that only 2 vials had shattered. 10 remained intact. Dylan's rifle barked twice in quick succession. Vance went down, the pistol flying from her hand. She fell beside the table, blood spreading across her shirt from 2 center mass shots. Sarah was moving before she even thought about it, training overriding everything else. She ran to Vance and dropped to her knees, her hands automatically going to the wounds, trying to stop the bleeding. "Why?" Sarah asked, tears streaming down her face. "Why did you make me choose between saving lives and saving you?" Vance looked up at her with dying eyes. "Because I wanted you to feel what I felt. Loss, grief, the knowledge that you failed someone you loved." Her breathing was getting shallow, blood bubbling at her lips. "Did I succeed?" Sarah shook her head, pressing harder on the wounds even though she knew it was futile. The bullets had hit major blood vessels. Vance was bleeding out internally. "I already felt that, every day since David died. Every single day." Vance's eyes flickered. "Good," she whispered. "Then maybe there's justice after all." Her eyes closed. Her breathing stopped. And Sarah Chen sat back on her heels, her hands covered in blood, and wept. Wept for David, for Lisa, for all the broken people that war had created, the ones who survived the bullets only to be killed by the memories. Dylan approached slowly and put his hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Ma'am, we need to move. Police will be here soon. We need to get you and those samples somewhere safe." Sarah nodded numbly. She stood up on shaking legs, picked up the case with the remaining antibody samples, and let Dylan guide her out of the warehouse. Behind them, the Admiral was already on the phone with Naval Intelligence, coordinating with the FBI, making sure the story that got told was the right one, making sure that Sarah Chen was protected. They drove through the pre-dawn darkness back to the safe house. Sarah sat in the back of the van, holding the case, staring at nothing. Emma was waiting when they arrived. She ran to her mother and they held each other without speaking. Some things didn't need words. "It's over," Sarah finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's really over." But it wasn't over. Not quite. There was still work to do. 3 days later, Sarah stood in a state-of-the-art laboratory at Naval Medical Center, San Diego. The facility had been cleared of all non-essential personnel. Armed Marines stood guard outside. And inside, Sarah worked alongside a team of the Navy's best medical researchers to synthesize the cure from the remaining antibody samples. It took 72 hours of continuous work, isolating the antibodies, replicating them through complex immunological processes, stabilizing them, creating a serum that could be safely administered to the dying SEALs. And on the 4th day, they were ready. Admiral Marcus Hayes was the first to receive the treatment. He lay in a hospital bed, monitors tracking every vital sign as Sarah prepared the IV line. The serum was clear, almost colorless, looking harmless in the bag hanging above his bed. "Are you ready, Admiral?" Sarah asked quietly. Hayes looked up at her and smiled. I've been ready for 18 years, Angel. Let's finish what you started in that tent. Sarah opened the line. The serum flowed into Hayes's bloodstream, carrying with it the antibodies that would help his immune system fight the ART7 degradation. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then the monitors started to change. Heart rate increasing slightly, blood pressure rising to more normal levels. Oxygen saturation climbing. Hayes gasped. His back arched off the bed. His hands clenched the sheets. Sarah leaned over him immediately, checking his pupils, his pulse ready to intervene if something went wrong. Admiral, Dylan was at the bedside in an instant. Do we need to stop? But then Hayes relaxed. His breathing steadied. Color returned to his face, the sickly gray pallor fading to something closer to healthy pink. He opened his eyes and they were clearer than they had been in months. I can feel it, Hayes whispered, wonder in his voice. Feel the poison leaving. Feel my body fighting back, winning. Sarah checked the monitors with trembling hands. His vital signs were stabilizing at levels she hadn't seen since reviewing his medical records from years ago. The serum was working. She had done it, created a cure from her own blood, given the dying SEALs a second chance at their second chance. Over the next week, the other 11 surviving SEALs received the treatment. One by one, each of them experiencing the same dramatic response. The cancers stopped growing. The organ damage began to reverse. The body's natural healing processes finally able to overcome the toxic breakdown of RT7. They weren't cured completely. The years of degradation had taken a permanent toll. But they were stable. They would live. They had been given time. Sarah had given them time. 2 weeks after Lisa Vance died in that warehouse, Sarah stood on the balcony of a new apartment overlooking San Diego Bay. She had resigned from Oceanside Medical Center, had accepted a position as Chief Medical Officer of Naval Special Warfare Command. The job came with a salary that was 3 times what she had made as a nurse. It came with respect and authority and the knowledge that she was making a difference at the highest levels. But more importantly, it came with time. Time to be a mother, time to heal, time to forgive herself for the things she couldn't control. Emma was inside, studying for her medical school exams. She had transferred from Johns Hopkins to UC San Diego to be closer to her mother. They had dinner together every night, talked about medicine and life and David, slowly rebuilding the relationship that Sarah's guilt and workaholism had damaged. The door opened behind her. Dylan Cross stepped onto the balcony. He was in civilian clothes, his shoulder fully healed. His expression was serious. "Ma'am," he said, "the Admiral wants to see you, says it's important." Sarah followed him to Naval Medical Center. They took the elevator to the top floor, to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Admiral Hayes was there, looking healthier than Sarah had seen him since Kandahar. The other surviving members of the original Lazarus Protocol stood around him. 12 men, all of them enhanced, all of them saved twice by the same woman. "Dr. Chen," the Admiral said, "thank you for coming. Please sit." Sarah sat in the chair he indicated. The 12 SEALs formed a semicircle around her. It was intimidating but also strangely comforting. 18 years ago, the Admiral began, you saved our lives in a tent in Afghanistan. You broke every rule, violated every protocol, and you gave us a gift we didn't deserve. More time. He paused, his voice growing emotional. 2 weeks ago, you saved us again. Created a cure that stopped us from dying, from wasting away because of the very thing that made us stronger. You gave us more time. The Admiral looked at each of his men in turn, then back at Sarah. We owe you a debt that can never be repaid. But we wanted to offer you something, a choice, a purpose. What kind of choice? Sarah asked. The Admiral pulled out a folder. Inside were documents, official military papers with Navy letterhead and multiple signature lines. We're forming a new unit, the Admiral explained, a medical rapid response team. SEALs with advanced combat medicine training, led by the best field nurse in history. We'll go into places where conventional medicine can't reach. War zones, disaster areas, anywhere people are dying and no one else can save them. He slid the folder across the table to Sarah. We're calling it Angel Protocol, and we want you to be our angel. Sarah opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside was a commission, officer rank, United States Navy, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, Medical Corps. I'm trying to medical done. She looked up at the 12 men who had defined the last 18 years of her life. Men she had saved. Men who had saved her. Men who understood that sometimes the greatest act of heroism wasn't fighting. It was refusing to let someone die. When do we start? Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the emotion swirling inside her. The Admiral smiled. We already have our first mission. Refugee camp on the Syrian border. Mass casualties from recent fighting. No medical infrastructure. Thousands of wounded with nowhere to go. He looked at Sarah with eyes that held both hope and challenge. They need a miracle. They need an angel. Sarah stood up slowly. She looked at the commission papers, thought about the life she had lived, the mistakes she had made, the people she had saved, and the people she had failed. She thought about David, about how he would want her to keep fighting, keep saving lives, keep being the person he had fallen in love with before the war had broken them both. She picked up the papers and signed them with a pen the Admiral handed her. I'm in, she said firmly. Let's go save some lives. 6 months later, Sarah Chen stood in a medical tent in a refugee camp outside Aleppo, Syria. The conditions were almost identical to what she had experienced in Kandahar 18 years earlier. The oppressive heat, the pervasive dust that got into everything, the overwhelming number of wounded, the feeling that no matter how hard you worked, it would never be enough. But this time she wasn't alone. This time she had a team, 12 Navy SEALs with advanced medical training, working alongside her with the same precision they once used to wage war, setting up surgical stations, triaging patients with brutal efficiency, saving lives. Emma was there too. She had taken a gap year from medical school to volunteer, to learn from her mother, to understand what it meant to be a healer in places where healing seemed impossible. Commander Cross, Sarah called out over the noise of the busy tent. I need another unit of O negative. Dylan appeared at her shoulder immediately, carrying a blood bag. He handed it to her without a word. They had worked together so many times now that communication was almost telepathic. They moved like parts of a single organism, saving lives with ruthless efficiency. Sarah inserted the IV line into a young girl who had been caught in a mortar blast. 7 years old, shrapnel wounds, massive blood loss, the same kind of injuries Sarah had treated 1,000 times before. But every time felt like the first time. Every life saved felt like redemption. She worked for 18 hours straight that day, saved 14 people who should have died, lost 2 who she couldn't save fast enough. The ratio was better than it used to be, but it still hurt every time. When the sun set, Sarah walked outside the tent and looked up at the stars. The Syrian sky was incredibly clear, unpolluted by city lights. The stars looked close enough to touch, ancient light traveling across impossible distances to reach her eyes. Dylan found her there. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside her in comfortable silence. 2 people who had been changed by war, who had found purpose in the aftermath, who understood that healing was just another form of fighting. You know, Dylan said finally, I used to think that what happened in Kandahar was a miracle, that you were some kind of angel who appeared out of nowhere to save us. He looked at her, his face serious in the starlight. But I was wrong. You're not an angel. You're just a person who refuses to accept that some things are impossible, who looks at death and says no, who fights even when the fight seems hopeless. He smiled slightly. That's better than being an angel. That's being human. That's being a hero. Sarah shook her head, a small smile on her face. I'm not a hero. I'm just a nurse who got lucky, who made choices that happened to work out. Dylan's expression turned serious. Ma'am, with all due respect, there's no such thing as luck when you save the same people twice over 18 years. That's not luck. That's purpose. That's destiny. Sarah looked up at the infinite stars, thought about all the roads that had led her to this moment. The tent in Kandahar, where she had first saved these men. The hospital in San Diego where they had found her. The warehouse where Lisa Vance had died. The laboratory where she had created the cure. All of it connected. All of it meaningful. All of it leading to this moment in this place, standing under Syrian stars and preparing to do tomorrow what she had done today. Save lives. Refuse to quit. Be the angel of shadows. Maybe you're right, Sarah said quietly. Maybe this is what I was always meant to do. She turned to walk back into the tent. There were more patients waiting, more lives to save, more impossible situations that required someone willing to try anyway. But before she went inside, she looked back at Dylan one more time. Thank you, she said, for finding me, for reminding me why I do this, for being my family. Dylan came to attention and saluted. It was a crisp, perfect salute, the kind reserved for officers and heroes. No, ma'am, he said quietly. Thank you for everything. Sarah returned the salute. Then she went back into the tent and got back to work. Because that was what angels did. They didn't rest. They didn't quit. They worked until everyone was saved or there was no one left to save. And Sarah Chen, the angel of shadows, wasn't done saving people yet. Not by a long shot. 5 years later, Emma Chen stood on the stage at UC San Diego's medical school graduation, receiving her diploma with highest honors. She looked out at the audience and saw her mother in the front row, wearing her Navy uniform, the silver oak leaves of a full commander gleaming on her collar. Beside Sarah sat Admiral Marcus Hayes, fully recovered, leading naval special warfare with the wisdom of someone who had been given 2 second chances and used them well. The rest of Angel Protocol was there too. 12 SEALs who had become Sarah's family, who had taught Emma everything they knew about combat medicine and courage under fire, who had shown her what it meant to serve something larger than yourself. When Emma walked off the stage, diploma in hand, Sarah stood and saluted her daughter. It was the same salute Dylan had given Sarah all those years ago in that warehouse. Recognition, respect, love. Emma saluted back. And in that moment, Sarah Chen understood something fundamental about redemption. You didn't earn it by being perfect. You earned it by getting back up every time you fell, by learning from your mistakes, by refusing to let guilt and grief define you, by choosing to save lives even when you couldn't save everyone. David would have been proud, Sarah thought, her eyes wet with tears. Proud of Emma, proud of what we've built from the ashes of his death. That night, Sarah stood alone on the beach near her apartment. The Pacific Ocean stretched out before her, dark and vast and infinite. She took off her boots and walked into the surf, feeling the cold water around her ankles. She thought about the 23 years since Kandahar, about the lives saved and the lives lost, about the impossible protocol that had brought men back from death, about the cure that had saved them a second time. She thought about Lisa Vance, about how grief and rage had consumed her, about how easily Sarah could have followed the same path if she hadn't found purpose in service, if she hadn't let Dylan and the others show her that her life still had meaning. And she thought about the future, about the missions still to come, about the people who still needed saving, about Emma following in her footsteps, becoming the doctor Sarah had always wanted to be. Sarah Chen was 57 years old. She had gray in her hair and scars on her hands. She had buried a husband and faced down killers. She had performed surgery in war zones and created cures in laboratories. She had saved 12 men twice, had raised a daughter who would save countless more, had built something meaningful from the chaos of war. Tomorrow she would deploy to Haiti, a cholera outbreak threatening thousands. Angel Protocol was being mobilized for emergency intervention. It would be hard. It would be dangerous. People would die despite her best efforts. But some would live, and that was worth fighting for. Sarah walked back up the beach toward her apartment. Emma was waiting inside, already packing medical supplies for the Haiti mission. Mother and daughter, both healers, both warriors. Ready? Emma asked, looking up from the supplies. Sarah smiled. Always. They worked through the night, preparing for the battle ahead. Not a battle fought with bullets and bombs, but a battle fought with antibiotics and IVs and the absolute refusal to let death win. And when the sun rose over San Diego Bay, turning the water to gold, Angel Protocol lifted off in a C-130 transport plane, flying toward another impossible mission. Because that was what they did, what they would always do. They were the angels in the shadows, the healers in the darkness, the last hope for the hopeless. And as long as Sarah Chen drew breath, as long as her daughter followed in her footsteps, as long as the 12 SEALs she had saved stood ready to fight, death would always have to work a little harder to claim its victories. Because angels didn't quit. They didn't surrender. They didn't accept that some lives weren't worth saving. They just kept fighting, kept healing, kept proving that miracles weren't magic. They were just medicine delivered by people who refused to give up. And that was the legacy of the Lazarus Protocol, not the RT-7, not the enhancement, not the super soldiers. The legacy was Sarah Chen, a nurse who became a legend, a woman who saved men from death twice and taught them that true strength wasn't in enhanced bodies or alien genetics. True strength was in the heart of someone who looked at the impossible and did it anyway. Sarah Chen, Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy Medical Corps, Chief Medical Officer of Angel Protocol, the woman who brought the dead back to life, not through alien technology or military experiments, but through compassion, through skill, through dedication, through the simple human refusal to let good people die when she had the power to save them. That was her protocol. That was her legacy. And it would endure long after she was gone. in the students she trained, in the patients she saved, in the daughter who would carry the torch forward. The Lazarus Protocol, not a formula, not a drug, not a procedure, a promise, a commitment, a covenant with every dying person who crossed her path. I will not let you die, not today, not on my watch. And for 57 years, Sarah Chen had kept that promise. She would keep it for as long as she could draw breath, because that was what angels did. They kept their promises, no matter the cost. The end. I spent 3 months researching this story, and what haunts me most isn't the firefights or conspiracies. It's Sarah's choice. She broke every rule to save 12 strangers, lost her career twice, and when given the chance to walk away, she went back into the fire. That's the difference between a job and a calling. For those asking, yes, RT, 7 protocols existed. The names are changed, but the sacrifice was real. What would you do if saving a life meant losing everything? Drop your thoughts below. And if this story moved you, there's more where this came from. Hit subscribe, you won't regret it.